When a pregnant waitress locked eyes with the Mafia kingpin she'd been hiding from for 8 months, she knew her carefully buried life had just detonated. Serena Vale had survived betrayal, framing, and a death sentence, only to watch Damian Moretti walk into her restaurant with another woman on his arm. The father of her unborn child. The man who still believed she was dead. In the next 60 seconds, everything she'd fought to protect would either shatter completely or force her back into the most dangerous world she'd ever known. If you want to see how far this story of power, betrayal, and survival reaches, drop a like and comment your city below. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Sal's diner buzzed overhead like trapped insects, casting harsh shadows across the cracked vinyl booths and scuffed linoleum floor. Serena Vale moved through the Friday night dinner rush with practiced invisibility, one hand supporting the small of her back, the other balancing a tray of burgers and fries that smelled like grease and desperation. 8 months. That's how long she'd been dead. 8 months since Damian Moretti had stood over what he thought was her body in that warehouse fire. 8 months since his cousin Vincent had orchestrated the perfect frame, the perfect betrayal, the perfect disappearance. 8 months of living under a false name in the kind of neighborhood where nobody asked questions because everyone had secrets worth keeping. "Table 7 needs water," Jerry called from the kitchen window, his gravel voice cutting through the din of conversation and clinking silverware. Serena nodded, lowering the tray to a family of 4 who barely glanced at her. That's what she'd learned to perfect, the art of being overlooked. Her dark hair, once styled in the elegant waves that had graced charity galas and society pages, now hung in a simple ponytail. The designer dresses that had once whispered against her skin were replaced by a stained uniform that stretched across her swollen belly. No makeup, no jewelry except the cheap gold band she'd bought at a pawn shop to ward off questions. She was a ghost wearing someone else's life. The double doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of November wind that carried the scent of exhaust and impending snow. Serena turned reflexively, her waitress smile already in place, and felt the entire world stop. Damian Moretti stood in the doorway like a king surveying conquered territory. The air left her lungs in a silent rush. Her fingers went numb around the water pitcher. For one crystalline moment, time suspended itself, and she saw him exactly as she remembered. 6'3" of controlled violence wrapped in a $3,000 suit, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Carrara marble, eyes the color of winter storms that had once looked at her like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. Those same eyes now held the calculated indifference of a man who'd buried his wife and moved on. Because he had moved on. The woman on his arm proved it, a statuesque blonde in a dress that probably cost more than Serena made in 6 months, diamond earrings catching the cheap diner lights and transforming them into something that didn't belong in this world. She laughed at something Damian said, her manicured hand resting possessively on his forearm. His fiancée. Serena had seen the announcement 3 weeks ago, buried in the society pages of a newspaper someone had left behind. Damian Moretti and Alessandra Giordano to wed in spring ceremony. The alliance that would unite 2 of Chicago's most powerful families. The strategic marriage that would cement his power in the aftermath of his wife's tragic death. Serena's hand moved to her belly without conscious thought, fingers spreading over the swell where their son grew, strong and insistent, a secret that kicked against her ribs like he knew his father was close. "Move!" The command screamed through her paralysis. Hide. Run. Do anything but stand here like a target. But her body had betrayed her, rooted to the spot as Damian's party moved toward the hostess stand. 4 people total. Damian and his fiancée, plus 2 men Serena recognized as members of his inner circle. Marco and Tomas, both built like brick walls, both carrying the weight of concealed weapons with the ease of long practice. "Seating for 4, Damian said to the hostess, his voice carrying across the diner like a physical force. Deep, commanding. A voice that had once whispered her name in the dark, that had promised her safety and forever in the same breath. The hostess, a 19-year-old named Crystal who spent more time on her phone than doing her job, grabbed menus without looking up. "Follow me." They moved into the dining room and Serena finally found the strength to turn away, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. The water pitcher trembled in her grip, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He won't recognize you, she told herself, forcing her feet to carry her toward the kitchen. You're nobody to him now, just another tired waitress in a forgettable place. But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. Because Damien Moretti forgot nothing. His mind was a steel trap that cataloged every face, every detail, every potential threat or advantage. It was what made him dangerous. It was what had kept him alive in a world where men like him usually died young and violent. "Serena!" Jerry's voice cracked like a whip. "Table 7, water, today would be nice." She jerked, water splashing over her hand. "Sorry, going now." The pitcher felt like it weighed 100 pounds as she filled it from the soda fountain, her hands shaking so badly the stream missed the rim twice. Behind her, she could hear Crystal seating Damien's party, could hear the scrape of chairs and the rustle of expensive fabric against cheap vinyl. Table 7. The numbers penetrated slowly, horror spreading through her chest like spilled ink. They were sitting at table 7. "No." The word escaped as barely a whisper. "No, no, no." "Problem?" Marcus, the line cook, paused in the middle of flipping burgers, his scarred face creasing with concern. Serena stared at the water pitcher, at her own distorted reflection in its stainless steel surface. "I can't. Table 7. I can't." "You sick? Baby coming?" Marcus had been kind to her in his gruff way, never asking about the lack of a husband or the haunted look that sometimes crept into her eyes late at night when the dinner rush died down. "I just need a minute." She set the pitcher down carefully, afraid if she held it any longer, she'd drop it. "Can someone else—" "We're slammed, honey." Jerry appeared at her elbow, his weathered face tight with stress. "Jenny called in sick, Crystal's useless, and we got 3 tables waiting. I need you on the floor. But tips are good tonight. You need the money, right?" He wasn't being cruel, just practical. Jerry knew she was saving every penny, knew she had a baby coming, and no support system. What he didn't know was why. What he didn't know was that the man sitting at table 7 had once owned half of Chicago's underworld, that he'd killed men for far less than the betrayal he believed Serena had committed, that if he recognized her, this diner would become a crime scene before the dessert menu came out. Right. She picked up the pitcher again, her fingers white against the metal. "I've got it." The walk to table 7 felt like the longest journey of her life. Each step carried her closer to the moment of recognition, to the shattering of the fragile safety she'd built. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself even smaller than the uniform already did. "Just water. Pour the water and get out." He's focused on his fiancée. "He won't even look at you." "Water." Her voice came out steady, professionally neutral, a small miracle given that her entire body was screaming at her to run. "Please." Alessandra's voice was cultured, bored. She didn't even glance up from her menu. Serena moved to her first, filling the glass with careful precision. Then Marco, then Tomas. Each pour bought her a few more seconds of anonymity, a few more heartbeats where she was just the help beneath notice. Then there was only one glass left. Damien's glass. She could feel his presence like heat from a bonfire, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, something dark and expensive that whispered of old money and new power. Her hand extended, the pitcher tilting, water streaming into his glass in a perfect arc. "Thank you." 2 words. Just 2 words in that voice that had once been her entire world. "You're welcome." She kept her eyes locked on the glass, watching it fill, counting the seconds until she could escape. Almost there. Almost. The baby kicked, hard, a sharp jab directly against her ribs that made her gasp, made her hand jerk, made water splash across the table and onto Damien's sleeve. "Shit!" The curse escaped before she could stop it. "I'm so sorry, She grabbed napkins, reaching across to blot at his jacket, her pregnant belly bumping the table edge, her face coming up, and met Damien Moretti's eyes for the first time in 8 months. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. She watched it happen in slow motion, the casual indifference shattering, replaced by shock so profound it cracked the mask he'd spent years perfecting. His face went white, then red, then white again. His hand shot out, catching her wrist in a grip that was just shy of painful, his fingers wrapping around the delicate bones like a manacle. "Serena." Her name left his mouth in a strangled whisper, disbelief and fury, and something that might have been anguish all tangled together. "You're, Damien?" Alessandra's voice cut through the moment, sharp with confusion. "What's wrong?" But he didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because his gaze had dropped to Serena's belly, to the obvious, unmistakable swell of advanced pregnancy. And the expression that crossed his face was one of such raw devastation that Serena felt it like a knife between her ribs. His child. Their child. The secret she'd been carrying for 8 months while he grieved a woman who wasn't dead. "Let go," Serena whispered, trying to pull her arm free. "Please, you're hurting me." The words seemed to break through his shock. He released her so suddenly she stumbled backward, the water pitcher slipping from her grasp and shattering against the floor in an explosion of glass and liquid. The diner went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Crystal froze at the hostess stand, her phone forgotten. Jerry appeared in the kitchen window, his expression thunderous. "I'm sorry." Serena's voice sounded distant to her own ears, hollow. "I'll clean it up. Outside." Damien's voice cut through her babbling, sharp as a blade. "Now!" "Damien, what the hell is going on?" Alessandra demanded, but he ignored her, rising from the booth with the fluid grace of a predator. "I don't—" Serena backed up another step, glass crunching under her worn sneakers. "I'm working. I can't just— Now, Serena." He moved toward her, and despite the crowded diner, despite the witnesses, there was something in his eyes that made it clear this wasn't a request. "Or I will carry you out of here myself." Marco and Tomas were on their feet now, their hands inside their jackets, their faces blank in that way that meant they were ready for violence at a moment's notice. Serena could feel the entire situation spiraling out of control, could see the path that led from this moment to police reports and questions she couldn't afford to answer. "Fine." She stripped off her apron with shaking hands, let it fall to the floor beside the broken glass. 5 minutes. "Take as long as you need." Jerry's voice was tight with an anger that had nothing to do with the mess and everything to do with the obvious threat radiating from the men in expensive suits. "You okay, honey?" "I'm fine." The lie tasted like ash. "I just need to talk to an old friend." Jerry's expression said he knew bullshit when he heard it, but he was a practical man who understood that sometimes the best thing you could do for someone was let them handle their own disasters. "Your shift ends at 11 anyway. Come get your tips tomorrow." It was a kindness, giving her an out, a way to not come back if she needed to run again. Serena felt a rush of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you." Then she was moving toward the door, Damien a step behind her, his presence a furnace at her back. The November wind hit her like a slap when she stepped outside, cutting through the thin uniform and making her shiver. The street was quiet, the kind of neighborhood where the late-night crowd stuck to bars and the early birds were already asleep. A black SUV sat at the curb, engine running, tinted windows reflecting the neon glow of the diner's sign. Damien's hand settled on her lower back, a touch that was both possessive and protective, guiding her toward the vehicle. "Don't touch me." She jerked away from him, wrapping her arms around her middle. "Don't you dare touch me." He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. In the sodium light of the street lamp, he looked older than she remembered, harder, with new lines carved around his mouth and shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. "You're alive." He said it like he was testing the words, like he couldn't quite make himself believe them. 8 months. 8 goddamn months, and you're alive." Disappointed? The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Sorry to ruin your fresh start." His hand shot out so fast she didn't have time to flinch, catching her chin and forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were wild, burning with an emotion so intense she couldn't name it. "Disappointed?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a jagged edge that spoke of barely controlled rage. "You think I'm disappointed? Jesus Christ, Serena. I mourned you. I buried you. I stood over what I thought was your body and swore I would burn this entire city to the ground to avenge you. And instead, you got engaged." She wrenched her chin free, glaring at him through the tears that were starting to blur her vision. "Looks like you recovered just fine. That's business, a strategic alliance to—" He stopped, his gaze dropping to her belly again, and she watched the fury in his eyes shift into something more complicated. Is it mine? The question landed like a physical blow. She took a step back, her hand moving protectively over the swell of their child. How dare you? How dare I? His voice rose, raw and ragged. You let me think you were dead. You disappeared without a trace, and now you show up 8 months pregnant, working in a goddamn diner like some kind of ghost, and you want to talk about how I dare? I didn't have a choice. The words ripped out of her, months of suppressed fear and anger finally breaking free. Your cousin framed me, Damien. Vincent set me up, forged evidence, made it look like I was the one selling information to the Calabrese family. He was going to kill me, and when I ran, he tried to finish the job. Damien went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded extreme violence. What did you say? Vincent. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to let him see the truth written in every line of her face. He forged documents, doctored recordings, planted evidence in my belongings. He made it look like I was the leak, like I was the reason the warehouse raid went wrong and 3 of your men died. He knew you'd kill me for it. That's impossible. But even as he said it, she could see doubt creeping into his expression, could see him replaying events through a new lens. Vincent is family. He wanted your position. Serena wrapped her arms tighter around herself, the cold seeping into her bones. He thought if he could get rid of me, destabilize you emotionally, create chaos in your organization, he could stage a coup. Make it look like you were weak, compromised by a traitor wife. If any of this was true, why didn't you come to me? Damien's voice was quieter now, dangerous in its intensity. Why run? Why let me think you were dead? Because I found the bomb in my car. The memory of that moment still had the power to paralyze her. Opening the driver's door of her BMW and seeing the crude device wired beneath the steering column, the digital timer counting down. 3 minutes, Damien. I had 3 minutes to get away before it would have vaporized me and anyone within 20 feet. I ran because Vincent had made it clear that if the bomb didn't kill me, one of his loyal men would. She watched him process this, watched the implications cascade through his strategic mind. The warehouse fire. He used my car as the body. It still made her sick to think about it. Parked it in the warehouse, let the timer run down. By the time anyone found it, there wasn't enough left to identify. A few of my personal effects that he'd planted, some DNA evidence that probably came from my hairbrush or clothes. Enough to convince you I'd died in the explosion. Jesus Christ. Damien ran a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. Do you have proof? Any evidence? I have Vincent's own words. She pulled out her phone, a cheap prepaid thing she'd bought with cash, and scrolled through her photos until she found the one she'd taken that night, the one she'd kept as insurance. He sent me a message right after the bomb went off. Wanted me to know who'd won. She held out the phone, watching Damien's face as he read the text message that had arrived while she crouched in an alley 3 blocks from the explosion, her hands bloody from climbing over a chain-link fence, her mind still reeling from how close she'd come to dying. Sorry about the car, cousin. Nothing personal, just business. Say hi to your wife for me. Oh wait, she's dead. My mistake. Damien's hand tightened on the phone, and for a moment Serena thought he might crush it. When he looked up, his eyes were black with a fury so profound it was almost beautiful in its purity. Where is he now? I don't know. I've been trying to stay invisible, remember? She took the phone back, her fingers brushing his and sending an electric shock through her system that she desperately tried to ignore. I haven't exactly been keeping tabs on your organization. He's at my right hand. The words came out like ground glass. After you died, he was the one who helped me hold everything together, advised me on the Giordano alliance, suggested I needed to remarry quickly to show strength. Of course he did. Serena felt a sick satisfaction at being proven right, even as it twisted the knife deeper. The engagement removes you as a viable target for suspicion if something happens to Alessandra's family. It locks you into an alliance that benefits Vincent more than it benefits you. Am I wrong? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. The SUV door opened and Tomas stepped out, his expression carefully neutral. Boss? Everything okay? No. Damien's voice was flat, controlled, all emotion locked down behind the mask he showed the world. But it will be. Take my fiancée back to the hotel. Tell her something came up. Business. And this? Tomas's gaze flicked to Serena, taking in her pregnant belly and worn uniform with the kind of professional assessment that missed nothing. Situation? Is none of your concern. Damien pulled out his own phone, his fingers flying across the screen. I need a clean location, somewhere Vincent doesn't know about, and I need Marco to start digging into my wife's supposed death. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every goddamn detail. I want to know exactly what we missed. Your wife? Tomas's eyes widened fractionally. The most shock Serena had ever seen him display. But she's alive. Damien looked at Serena, and in his gaze she saw a promise that was equal parts protection and possession. Very much alive. And carrying my child. The words hung in the frozen air between them, a declaration and a claiming all at once. I'm not going with you. Serena forced the words out. Even as part of her, the part that remembered safety in his arms, remembered what it felt like to be protected instead of hunted, screamed at her to accept. I've built a life here. I'm safe. I don't need... Safe? Damien's laugh was harsh, humorless. You think you're safe working in a diner for minimum wage, living in whatever shithole neighborhood accepts cash and doesn't ask questions? Serena, if Vincent figures out you're alive, and he will, now that I know, you're dead. You and our child. Then I'll run again. Where? He stepped closer, crowding her space in a way that made her pulse race. How far do you think you'll get with a newborn? Because that baby is coming soon, isn't it? What are you, 8 months along? 7.5, she admitted reluctantly. Even better. So you're going to run 7.5 months pregnant, with no money, no connections, no identity that isn't borrowed, and somehow stay hidden from a man who has eyes in every city in this country. He shook his head. You're smarter than that. I survived this long. You got lucky. His hand came up, hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her, but didn't quite dare. And luck runs out, Tesoro. You know it does. The endearment, my treasure, hit her like a punch to the chest. He hadn't called her that since the night before everything went to hell, the last night they'd spent in bed together, his hands gentle on her skin, his voice soft in the darkness. She'd been 2 weeks pregnant and hadn't known it yet. Don't call me that. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. You don't get to call me that anymore. You moved on. You're getting married to someone else. A business arrangement that means nothing. He said it with such casual dismissal that Serena almost believed him. Alessandra knows what this is. There's no love there, no commitment beyond what serves both our families. And what am I supposed to be? The mistress? The secret you keep in a penthouse somewhere while you play happy families with your Mafia princess? You're my wife. The words came out like a vow. The mother of my child. That makes you the most important person in my world, whether you believe it or not. Your world tried to kill me, and I will burn it to the ground to keep you safe. He stepped even closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body, until his presence overwhelmed everything else. But first, I need to know everything, every detail of what Vincent did, every piece of evidence you have. I need to confirm your story, verify the betrayal, and then I need to decide how to handle this without starting a war that gets you killed in the crossfire. And if I refuse? His expression hardened into something that reminded her why men feared him. Then I'll have Tomas pick you up and carry you to the car. Your choice. Walk with me willingly or be dragged. Either way, you're coming with me. You're not spending another night unprotected. She should have been angry at the high-handed command, at his assumption that he could just swoop back into her life and take over. But beneath the fury and the fear, she felt something else stirring. Relief. Bone-deep, exhausted relief that she didn't have to carry this alone anymore. Where? She asked quietly. I have a penthouse. Off-book property that Vincent doesn't know about. Secure building, good sightlines, defensible. He pulled out his phone again, typing rapidly. I'm calling in my personal security team, people who were loyal to me before Vincent ever entered the picture. You'll have round-the-clock protection while I sort this out. And Alessandra? Will be told that business required my immediate attention. He pocketed his phone, his gaze never leaving her face. She's not stupid. She knows what she signed up for. The Giordano family wanted an alliance with my organization, not a love match. Serena wanted to ask more, wanted to understand the depth of his relationship with the elegant blonde who'd sat across from her, but exhaustion was starting to creep in, the adrenaline crash leaving her shaky and weak. "I'm tired." The admission felt like defeat. "I've been on my feet for 6 hours, and I need to sit down." Immediately, his hand was at her elbow, supporting her weight with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence she knew he was capable of. "Car, now." This time, she didn't fight him. She let him guide her to the SUV, let Tomas open the door and help her into the plush leather interior that smelled like expensive cologne and gun oil. Damien slid in beside her, his presence filling the space, making it impossible to think about anything except the fact that he was here, real, and 8 months of careful isolation had just shattered like the water pitcher on the diner floor. "Where do you live?" he asked as Tomas pulled away from the curb. "You'll need clothes, anything important." "A studio apartment above a laundromat on Kedzie." She rattled off the address, watching his expression darken as he recognized the neighborhood, one of the rougher parts of the city, where gunshots were common enough that nobody bothered calling the police anymore. "It's not much, but the landlord doesn't ask questions." Jesus Christ, Serena. He looked like he wanted to put his fist through something. "You've been living in that hellhole for 8 months?" "I've been surviving." She met his gaze steadily, which is more than I would have done if I'd stayed. He had no answer for that. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a series of calls in rapid Italian, his voice clipped and commanding as he issued orders that would reshape the next 24 hours. Security teams mobilizing, safe houses being prepared, intelligence being gathered on Vincent's movements and associations. Serena closed her eyes and let the words wash over her, too exhausted to parse the details. The baby shifted inside her, a rolling movement that made her breath catch. She pressed her hand to the spot, feeling the solid push of a tiny foot or elbow. Their son. The secret she'd carried through 8 months of fear and isolation. The reason she'd survived when it would have been easier to give up. "Does he kick a lot?" She opened her eyes to find Damien staring at her belly, something raw and almost vulnerable in his expression. "All the time." She took his hand and placed it against the curve of her belly, just above where the baby was currently conducting what felt like gymnastics against her ribs. They sat there in silence for a long moment, Damien's palm warm through the thin fabric of her uniform, his entire body gone still with focus. Then the baby kicked, hard, directly against Damien's hand. The expression that crossed his face was one of such profound wonder that Serena felt tears prick her eyes. He spread his fingers wider, as if trying to gather as much contact as possible, and when he looked up at her, there was something fierce and protective in his gaze that made her chest tight. "He's strong. Like his father." The words escaped before she could stop them, and she saw the impact they had, the way his jaw clenched, the way his free hand fisted against his thigh. "I would have protected you." His voice was rough, scraped raw with emotion. "If you'd come to me with the truth, if you'd told me what Vincent was planning, I would have killed him before he could touch you." "I know." And she did know, which was part of what made this so complicated. But by the time I figured out what was happening, the bomb was already planted. The evidence was already forged. Vincent had spent weeks setting this up, making sure every piece was in place. If I'd gone to you with just suspicions and a paranoid feeling, would you have believed me? Over your own blood? The silence that followed was answer enough. "Exactly." She gently removed his hand from her belly, already missing the warmth. "Vincent had been with you since the beginning. He was family. I was just the woman you married for love in a world where that was considered a weakness. Who would you have trusted?" "You." The word was sharp, immediate. "Always you." "Now maybe, after you've had time to realize I'm telling the truth." She turned to look out the window, watching the city slide past in a blur of neon and shadow. "But 8 months ago? When you were still grieving your father, still consolidating power, still trying to prove to everyone that you were strong enough to lead? You would have questioned me, investigated me, and while you were doing that, Vincent would have found another way to kill me." She felt rather than saw him tense beside her, knew her words had hit home. Because she was right, and they both knew it. 8 months ago, Damien had been a man walking a razor's edge, trying to hold together an empire while proving he could be as ruthless as his father had been. A pregnant wife claiming his most trusted advisor was trying to kill her would have looked like hysteria, manipulation, or worse. So she'd run and survived. And now everything was infinitely more complicated. The SUV pulled up in front of a building that made Serena's current residence look like a condemned crack house. All glass and steel, the kind of place that had a doorman and security cameras, and probably cost more per month than she'd made in the last year. "Come on!" Damien was already out of the car, his hand extended to help her down. "Let's get you somewhere safe. Then we can figure out what comes next." Serena took his hand and let him pull her from the vehicle, her body aching and her mind spinning with the impossibility of the situation. 8 hours ago, her biggest concern had been whether she'd make enough in tips to cover the deposit on the second-hand crib she'd found. Now she was back in Damien Moretti's world, surrounded by armed men and expensive cars and the kind of danger she'd spent 8 months trying to escape. But as they walked into the building and the doorman greeted Damien with the kind of deference reserved for either celebrities or criminals, she realized with a sick certainty that there was no going back. Vincent knew the truth now, or would, as soon as Damien started asking questions. Her carefully constructed anonymity was shattered. The only question was whether she would survive what came next. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor, a sprawling domain of floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist luxury that felt more like a fortress than a home. Serena stood in the center of the living room, her worn sneakers sinking into carpet that probably cost more than her entire year's salary, and felt the disconnect between her current reality and her past life slam into her with devastating force. "Bedroom's through there." Damien moved past her, already on his phone again, his voice dropping into that clipped tone that meant he was issuing orders that would be followed without question. "Bathroom stocked. There should be clothes in the closet. Previous tenant left some things behind." Previous tenant? Serena wondered who that had been. What woman had occupied this space before her, whether Damien kept a rotation of safe houses for the women who drifted through his life. The thought made her stomach twist, jealousy mixing with anger at herself for caring. She had no claim on him anymore. Whatever they'd been to each other had died in that warehouse fire, along with her old identity. "I need to make some calls." He was already moving toward what looked like a study, his shoulders tense beneath the expensive suit. "Don't leave this apartment. The security system is biometric. It won't let you out without my authorization." "So I'm a prisoner." The words came out flat, exhausted. He stopped, turned to look at her with eyes that had gone hard again, the brief vulnerability from the car completely locked away. "You're protected. There's a difference." "Is there?" She wrapped her arms around her belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like a gilded cage." "Would you prefer the studio above the laundromat?" His voice was sharp, cutting. "Because I can arrange that. Just say the word, and I'll have Tomas drive you back. You can go back to serving coffee, to truck drivers, and hoping Vincent doesn't walk through the door one day." They stared at each other across the expensive carpet, the air between them crackling with unspoken words and 8 months of separation. Serena wanted to scream at him, wanted to throw something, wanted to demand how he could stand there looking at her like she was the one who'd done something wrong when he was the one getting married to another woman. But exhaustion won out over anger. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, and the baby was doing somersaults against her ribs like he could sense the tension radiating from both his parents. "Fine." She turned toward the bedroom, her voice hollow. "I'll stay. For now." She didn't wait for his response, just pushed through the door and closed it firmly behind her. The bedroom was enormous, dominated by a king-size bed with sheets that looked like they cost more than a car payment. The closet Damien had mentioned turned out to be a walk-in the size of her entire studio apartment, filled with clothes that were definitely meant for someone taller and less pregnant than her current state. Serena stood in the middle of all that luxury and felt something inside her crack. The adrenaline that had been holding her together since the moment she'd seen Damien walk through the diner door finally drained away, leaving her shaking and hollow. She made it to the bed before her legs gave out, sinking onto the mattress and pressing her face into her hands. She didn't cry. She'd learned months ago that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, that breaking down meant losing time she could spend surviving. But she let herself feel it. The overwhelming impossibility of the situation, the fear that had been her constant companion for 8 months, the traitorous relief that came from knowing she wasn't alone anymore. A soft knock interrupted her moment of weakness. She looked up to find Damien standing in the doorway, his jacket discarded, his tie loosened, looking more human than he had any right to. "Marco's bringing your things from the apartment." His voice was quieter now, some of the edge gone. "Should be here within the hour." "Okay." She wiped at her eyes, hating that he was seeing her like this, vulnerable and scared and so damn tired. "Thank you." He moved into the room slowly, like he was approaching a skittish animal, and sat on the edge of the bed with careful distance between them. "When's the last time you ate?" The question caught her off guard. "I had breakfast, toast, and—" "That was 12 hours ago, Serena." He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving across the screen. "You're eating for two. You can't skip meals." "I'm aware of how pregnancy works." But even as she said it, her stomach growled loudly enough to make him raise an eyebrow. "Fine, I'm hungry." Happy? Ecstatic. But there was no humor in his voice, just a grim determination that reminded her why he'd survived in a world that chewed up weaker men and spit them out. "Greek or Italian?" "I don't care." "Italian it is." He made the call in rapid-fire Italian, ordering what sounded like enough food to feed a small army. When he hung up, he turned to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The doctor will be here in the morning." "What doctor?" "My personal physician, Dr. Castellano. She's discreet, thorough, and she's delivered half the babies in families like mine." He said it like it was already decided, like her opinion on the matter was irrelevant. "You haven't had prenatal care in 8 months. That ends now." "I've been to free clinics." Serena felt the need to defend herself, to prove she hadn't been completely reckless with their child's health. "Every month. The baby's healthy. Strong heartbeat, good growth measurements, all the tests came back normal." "Free clinics." He said it like the words tasted bad. "Where you gave them a false name and paid in cash and prayed nobody looked too closely at your ID." "It was the best I could do." Anger flared hot in her chest, burning away some of the exhaustion. "I'm sorry my survival plan didn't meet your standards, Damien. Next time someone tries to blow me up, I'll make sure to maintain better healthcare documentation." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She pushed herself up, ignoring the way her body protested the movement. "Because it sounds an awful lot like you're criticizing the choices I made to stay alive. The choices I had to make because your cousin decided I was collateral damage in his power play." "I meant—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she remembered from 1,000 arguments before. "Christ, Serena, I meant that you shouldn't have had to do any of this alone. You should have been in the penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, surrounded by people whose job it was to keep you safe. You should have had the best doctors, the best care, everything you needed to bring our son into the world without having to worry about whether you could afford your next meal." The image he painted, the life she should have had, hung between them like a ghost. Serena could see it so clearly. Herself 8 months pregnant and glowing, living in their home, their real home, preparing a nursery with Damien's hand on her belly and his promises in her ear. A future where Vincent's betrayal had never happened, where trust hadn't been shattered, where she hadn't spent 8 months looking over her shoulder and sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow. "Well, I didn't have that." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I had a studio apartment and free clinics, and the constant fear that every person who looked at me too long might be one of Vincent's people. So I'm sorry if my coping mechanisms aren't up to your standards." "Stop." He was on his feet now, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Stop apologizing for surviving. Stop acting like you did something wrong by not dying when my bastard cousin tried to kill you." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, and Serena realized with horror that she was crying after all, silent tears tracking down her face, despite her best efforts to hold them back. "You're alive." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. "You're here. You're carrying my son. That's all that matters right now. Everything else, the how, the where, the choices you had to make, none of that matters except that you survived." "I was so scared." The confession broke free before she could stop it. "Every day, every hour, I was terrified that he'd find me. That I'd make one wrong move and end up dead in an alley somewhere. and our baby would die with me, and you'd never even know he existed. I know. He pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other settled protectively over her belly. I know, Tesoro, but you're safe now. I swear to you, on everything I am, Vincent will never touch you again. She wanted to believe him. Every cell in her body screamed at her to sink into his warmth, to let him shoulder the burden of keeping them safe, to trust that the man who'd once promised her forever could actually deliver on that promise. But 8 months of paranoia and survival instincts couldn't be turned off like a switch. How? She pulled back just enough to look up at him. How are you going to protect me when you don't even know who else is working with Vincent? He's had 8 months to consolidate power, to place his people in key positions. How do you know your entire security team isn't compromised? Because the men I'm calling in aren't part of the regular rotation. Damien's expression was grim, determined. They're old guard. People who were loyal to my father before Vincent ever entered the picture. Men who owe me blood debts that go deeper than money or territory. And your fiancé? Serena hated how the word tasted, hated the jealousy that burned hot and bitter in her chest. What are you going to tell Alessandra when she asks why you disappeared in the middle of your date night? The truth. He said it simply, like it wasn't going to blow his carefully constructed alliance to pieces. That my wife is alive, that she's been in hiding because someone in my organization tried to kill her, and that I need to handle the situation before it becomes a problem for both our families. You think the Giordanos are just going to accept that? That Alessandra is going to smile and nod while you bring your pregnant wife back into the fold? Serena shook her head, pulling away from him completely. She'll demand you choose. Her family will demand it. And when you choose me, if you choose me, you'll lose the alliance that's been keeping the peace for the last 8 months. Then I'll lose it. He said it with such casual certainty that it stole her breath. The Giordanos wanted an alliance with the Moretti family. They wanted access to our territory, our connections, our legitimacy. What they got was a business arrangement with clear terms and boundaries. If they can't handle the fact that my wife takes precedence over a contract marriage, then they were never serious partners to begin with. You're talking about starting a war. I'm talking about protecting my family. He moved closer again, his presence overwhelming. You and our son. That's my family. Everything else is just business. The food arrived before Serena could formulate a response, delivered by a nervous-looking young man who took one look at Damien's expression and practically threw the bags on the counter before fleeing. Damien unpacked containers of pasta and chicken and bread that smelled so good, Serena's stomach clenched with desperate hunger. Eat. He pushed a plate toward her, already loading it with generous portions. We can argue about alliance politics after you've had a proper meal. She wanted to keep fighting, wanted to make him understand the magnitude of what he was proposing, but the food won out. She was so hungry it made her dizzy, and the baby was kicking insistently like he knew sustenance was close. She ate mechanically at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as her body remembered what it felt like to have enough. Damien watched her from across the kitchen island, his own plate mostly untouched, his eyes tracking every bite she took like he was cataloging her nutritional intake. It should have been annoying, that intense focus, but instead it felt like being seen for the first time in months. When did you find out? He asked it quietly, his gaze dropping to her belly. About the baby. 2 weeks after I ran. Serena set down her fork, her hand moving automatically to the swell of her stomach. I'd been having morning sickness, thought it was just stress, went to a free clinic for something to settle my stomach, and they suggested a pregnancy test. And you didn't think to contact me. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Contact you how, Damien? Show up at one of your properties and hope Vincent wasn't there? Send you a message that could be intercepted? I was supposed to be dead. If I'd reached out and you'd believed I was a ghost or a trap or someone trying to manipulate you, it would have put a target on my back all over again. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too bitter to swallow. You're right. If you'd contacted me then, I probably would have thought it was a con, someone trying to exploit my grief. Exactly. She pushed her plate away, suddenly not hungry anymore despite the half-finished pasta. So I kept running. Found the studio apartment, got the job at the diner, Started planning for a life where I raised our son alone in hope that someday, when he was old enough to ask about his father, I could tell him the truth without putting us both in danger. That's not happening. Damien's voice was flat, absolute. My son isn't growing up without me. I've already missed 8 months of your pregnancy. I'll be damned if I miss another day. You might not have a choice. Serena forced herself to meet his gaze, to make him understand what he was walking into. Vincent isn't going to just confess and resign quietly. When you confront him, when you start investigating, he's going to know that I told you everything. And when that happens, he's going to accelerate whatever plan he has. He'll come for me, for you, for anyone who could expose him. This isn't going to end peacefully. I know. Something dark and predatory moved behind Damien's eyes, the civilized veneer cracking to show the killer underneath, which is why I'm not confronting him. Not yet. Then what? I'm going to do what he did to you. Damien stood, began pacing the length of the kitchen with restless energy. Build a case, gather evidence, put all the pieces in place so that when I move against him, it's not just my word against his. It's documented proof that he's a traitor who tried to kill a member of this family. That could take weeks. Fear spiked sharp through Serena's chest. Months, maybe. And every day that passes is another day he could figure out what you're doing. Then we'll have to be careful. He stopped pacing, turned to look at her with eyes that held the weight of difficult decisions. You stay here, protected, under guard 24/7. No one knows you're alive except the people in this room and Marco, who would die before betraying me. Meanwhile, I maintain the facade. Keep Vincent close. Let him think he's won, that the engagement to Alessandra is proceeding as planned. You're going to marry her? Serena said it flatly, trying to keep the devastation out of her voice. No. The word was sharp, immediate. I'm going to let Vincent think the wedding is moving forward while I dismantle his conspiracy piece by piece. But the only woman I'm married to is sitting in front of me right now. We never divorced, and we never will. He crossed back to her, dropping to a crouch so they were eye level. I don't care what papers need to be filed, what lies need to be told to keep up appearances. You're my wife. That baby is my son. Nothing changes that. Serena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he could navigate the impossible politics of keeping both her and his engagement to Alessandra in play while hunting his own cousin. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. What if it's not enough? Her voice came out small, afraid. What if you can't find proof before Vincent moves against you, before he figures out that I'm alive and comes after us? Then I'll kill him anyway. Damien said it with such casual certainty that it sent ice down her spine. With evidence or without, Vincent dies for what he tried to do to you. The only question is whether it happens quietly, with the family's blessing, or whether it starts a war that burns this city to the ground. And you'd risk that? Risk everything you've built for you. He cut her off, his hand coming up to cup her face again. For our son. For the family we should have had 8 months ago if my cousin hadn't decided to play king. Yes, Serena, I would risk it all. I would burn every bridge, destroy every alliance, reduce my empire to ashes if that's what it took to keep you safe. The conviction in his voice, the absolute certainty, broke through the last of her carefully maintained defenses. She leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of connection, of believing that maybe, just maybe, they could survive this. I'm scared. The admission felt like weakness, but she said it anyway. I've been scared for so long, and I don't know how to stop. You don't have to. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. Be scared, be angry, be whatever you need to be, but don't be alone, not anymore. They stayed like that for a long moment, locked together in the gleaming kitchen while the city glittered 42 stories below. Then the baby kicked hard enough to make Serena gasp, and Damien pulled back with something like wonder crossing his face. He's active tonight. He knows his father's close. Serena managed a tired smile. I think he's been waiting to meet you. Not as much as I've been waiting to meet him. Damien's hand settled over her belly again, his expression softening into something she'd never seen before. Pure, unguarded love for a child he hadn't known existed until a few hours ago. Have you picked a name? I was waiting. She covered his hand with hers, their fingers tangling together. It didn't feel right to choose without you. We have time. He stood, gently pulling her up with him. Right now, you need sleep, real sleep, in a real bed, without having to worry about whether the door is locked or if that noise in the hallway is someone coming to kill you. He was right. Exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts slow. She let him guide her back to the bedroom, let him pull back the expensive sheets, and help her ease down onto the mattress that felt like sleeping on a cloud after months of the cheap futon in her studio. Stay. She caught his hand before he could pull away. Just for a few minutes, please. Something complicated moved across his face. Surprise, pain, longing. But he nodded and stretched out beside her on top of the covers, careful not to crowd her. Serena shifted onto her side, her belly pressed against his hip, and felt some of the tension that had been her constant companion for 8 months finally begin to ease. I won't let anything happen to you. His voice was quiet in the darkness, a promise and a vow. Not again. Not ever. She wanted to tell him that he couldn't promise that the world they lived in didn't allow for guarantees. But sleep was already pulling her under, dragging her down into the first restful darkness she'd known in months. The last thing she felt was Damien's hand settling over their son, protective and possessive, a claim on the family he'd thought he lost. When she woke, gray dawn light was filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and Damien was gone. Panic spiked through her chest before she saw the note on the pillow beside her, written in his sharp, decisive handwriting. Had to handle some business. Tomas is outside the door. Dr. Castellano will be here at 9. Don't even think about leaving. Serena crumpled the note in her fist, equal parts frustrated and relieved. She pushed herself upright, groaning as her body protested yesterday's emotional marathon. The baby was already awake, doing his morning gymnastics routine against her ribs. Your father is going to drive me crazy. She rubbed her belly, feeling the solid push of movement beneath her palm. Just like you. You're definitely his son. A knock on the bedroom door interrupted her one-sided conversation. Mrs. Moretti, it's Tomas. May I come in? The title, Mrs. Moretti, hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't heard it in 8 months, had convinced herself she'd never hear it again. For a moment, she couldn't breathe around the weight of recognition, of stepping back into an identity she'd buried along with her old life. Yes. Her voice came out steady despite the chaos in her chest. Come in. Tomas entered carrying a large duffel bag that she recognized as hers from the apartment. He set it down carefully near the closet, his expression professionally neutral. Mr. Moretti asked me to ensure you had your belongings. Marco retrieved everything from your residence last night. He paused, his gaze flicking to her belly before returning to her face. He also wanted me to tell you that breakfast will be delivered at 8, and Dr. Castellano has confirmed her 9 o'clock appointment. Where is he? Serena pushed herself off the bed, ignoring her body's protests. Damien, where did he go? I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Moretti's schedule, but something in Tomas's expression softened fractionally. He'll return this evening. In the meantime, my orders are to ensure your safety and comfort. So I'm under guard. You're under protection. Tomas corrected her gently. There's a difference. It was almost word for word what Damien had said last night, and Serena wondered if they'd rehearsed it or if it was just standard operating procedure in the Moretti organization. Either way, she was effectively trapped until Damien decided otherwise. Fine. She moved to the duffel bag, unzipping it to reveal her meager possessions. Some clothes, a few books, the ultrasound photos she'd kept hidden under her mattress. Thank you for bringing my things. Tomas nodded and withdrew, leaving her alone with the physical evidence of her last 8 months. Serena pulled out the ultrasound photos with trembling hands, spreading them across the bed like tarot cards. 4 months. 5 months. 6. 7. Each one showing the baby growing bigger, stronger, more real. The technician at the last clinic had told her it was a boy, had pointed out the tiny evidence on the grainy screen, and Serena had cried right there on the examination table because she'd known in that moment that she was carrying a son who would grow up to be just like his father, strong and stubborn and impossible to kill. She was still staring at the photos when breakfast arrived at 8 exactly, delivered by a different nervous young man who set up an elaborate spread on the dining room table before fleeing. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, croissants that smelled like butter in heaven, orange juice and coffee, and enough food to feed 4 people. Serena ate mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to the doctor's appointment, to what would happen when Damien came back, to the increasingly complicated web of lies and alliances that would need to be navigated. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the elevator doors open, didn't register the sound of footsteps, until a woman's voice cut through her spiraling anxiety. "So you're the ghost who came back from the dead." Serena's head snapped up to find Alessandra Giordano standing in the living room, looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Serena's entire wardrobe. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully neutral, and Damien was nowhere in sight. "How did you get in here?" Serena stood slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "This is a secure building. You shouldn't be able to—" "I'm Damien's fiancée." Alessandra said it pleasantly, like they were discussing the weather. "I have access to all his properties, including the ones he thinks are secret." The implication hung in the air between them, that Alessandra knew more about Damien's life than Serena did, that 8 months had shifted the balance of power in ways Serena hadn't fully grasped. "What do you want?" Serena forced herself to stand straighter, to meet the other woman's gaze without flinching. "If you're here to threaten me—" "Threaten you?" Alessandra laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Darling, if I wanted you dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd just tell Vincent where to find you and let nature take its course." Ice flooded Serena's veins. "You know about Vincent." "Of course I know about Vincent." Alessandra moved into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "I've known about his little coup attempt since before you died. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Serena's world tilted sideways. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, her mind racing to process what Alessandra had just said. The woman standing in front of her, Damien's fiancée, the alliance that was supposed to secure peace between 2 powerful families, knew about Vincent's betrayal and had said nothing. "You knew." The words came out strangled, barely above a whisper. "You knew Vincent tried to kill me, and you let Damien believe I was dead. You let him grieve." "You stood beside him at my funeral and said nothing." "I didn't know you were alive." Alessandra's tone was matter-of-fact, clinical. "I knew Vincent had orchestrated something. I knew there were inconsistencies in the evidence, holes in the timeline that didn't quite add up. But the body in that warehouse was real enough, the DNA evidence compelling enough. I assumed Vincent had succeeded in whatever he was planning. And you didn't tell Damien." Serena felt fury building in her chest, hot and righteous. "You had information that his own cousin was a traitor, and you kept it to yourself." "What would you have had me do?" Alessandra moved to the windows, looking out over the city with the air of someone surveying a chessboard. "Walk up to a man in the middle of grieving his wife and say, 'By the way, I think your most trusted advisor murdered her, but I have no proof, and it's really just a hunch based on some financial irregularities and suspicious timing.' That would have gone over well. You could have investigated. You could have—" "I did investigate." Alessandra turned back to face her, and for the first time, Serena saw something other than cool calculation in her eyes, a flash of anger, of frustration. "I spent 3 months digging into Vincent's activities, his finances, his associations. I found evidence of money being moved through shell companies, meetings with rival families that weren't authorized, communication patterns that suggested he was building his own power base. But nothing concrete. Nothing that would hold up in front of the family council. Nothing that would convince Damien to move against his own blood." Serena stared at her, trying to reconcile the elegant socialite in front of her with someone who'd been conducting a covert investigation into Mafia conspiracy. "Why? Why would you even care? You didn't know me. This wasn't your fight." "Because Vincent's ambition is a threat to my family as much as it is to Damien's." Alessandra said it simply, like it should be obvious. "The Giordanos entered into an alliance with the Moretti organization because we believed Damien was strong enough, smart enough, ruthless enough to hold his territory and protect our mutual interests. If Vincent succeeds in undermining him and taking control through a coup, we lose everything we invested in this partnership. So this is about business." Serena couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. "Your engagement to Damien, your investigation into Vincent, All of it is just about protecting your family's investment. Yes. Alessandra didn't even try to soften it. Welcome to our world, Serena. Love is a luxury. Power is currency. And survival means making strategic choices that sometimes require getting your hands dirty. The baby kicked hard against Serena's ribs, as if protesting the cold calculation in Alessandra's words. She pressed her hand to the spot, feeling the solid push of life, and made a decision. Does Damien know? She forced herself to ask the question that was tearing her apart. About your investigation. About what you suspected. Not yet. Alessandra moved back toward the kitchen, her heels clicking out a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. I was planning to brief him this week, once I had confirmation on a few remaining details. But then you showed up at that diner, very much alive and very clearly pregnant, and the entire situation became infinitely more complicated. Complicated how? Because now there's proof. Alessandra gestured at Serena's belly, her expression sharp. Vincent tried to kill you. He orchestrated your death, forged evidence, and let Damien believe his wife was murdered. That's not political maneuvering or ambitious power plays. That's a direct attack on Damien's family. It changes everything. But Serena processed this, her mind working through the implications. You're saying that with me alive, with my testimony about what happened, Damien can move against Vincent without it looking like paranoia or weakness. Exactly. Alessandra pulled out her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Vincent's entire strategy relied on you being dead and Damien being isolated in his grief. He counted on the fact that Damien would eventually move on, marry me, and consolidate power through our alliance while Vincent worked behind the scenes to undermine him. But you surviving throws all of that into chaos. So what happens now? Serena hated how small her voice sounded, hated that she was asking this woman, this stranger who was engaged to her husband, for guidance. What's the play here? Alessandra looked up from her phone, and something almost like respect flickered across her face. Now? Now we use you as the weapon Vincent never expected. We document everything. Your testimony about the bomb, the forged evidence, Vincent's confession via text message. We build an ironclad case that proves he's not just disloyal, he's actively working to destroy the Moretti family from within. And then we present it to the council and let them decide his fate. The council won't care that he tried to kill me. Serena said it with absolute certainty. They'll care that he failed, that he created instability and drew attention to the organization. You're smarter than you look. Alessandra's smile was sharp, predatory. I can see why Damien married you. Most women in his world are either decorative or dangerous. You're both. Before Serena could respond, the sound of the elevator doors opening made both women turn. Damien stepped into the penthouse, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. His expression was thunderous as his gaze moved from Alessandra to Serena and back again. What the hell are you doing here? He directed the question at Alessandra, his voice low and dangerous. I specifically told you to stay away until I sorted this out. And I specifically don't take orders. Alessandra pocketed her phone, completely unfazed by the fury radiating from him. We need to talk, Damien. All three of us. Because this situation is spiraling out of control faster than you realize. Get out! He moved toward her, every line of his body radiating threat. Now, before I have Tomas throw you out. Stop. Serena's voice cut through the tension, surprising herself as much as them. Let her stay. She knows about Vincent. She's been investigating him for months. Damien went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded extreme violence. When he turned to look at Alessandra, his eyes were black with barely controlled rage. Explain, right now. To her credit, Alessandra didn't flinch. She met his gaze steadily and began laying out everything she'd just told Serena. The investigation, the financial irregularities, the suspicious patterns that suggested Vincent was building towards something. Damien listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. You've known for 3 months that my cousin might be a traitor, and you said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, deadly. You sat across from me at dinners, smiled at family gatherings, planned our wedding, and kept this to yourself. I had no proof. Alessandra's tone remained calm, rational. Just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. If I'd come to you with half-formed theories, you would have investigated and tipped Vincent off that someone was watching him. He would have gone to ground, covered his tracks, and we'd never have been able to prove anything. So you decided to conduct your own investigation without consulting me. Damien's hands clenched into fists. In my organization, about my family, without my knowledge or permission. Yes, she said it without apology, without backing down. Because you were too close to see it clearly. Vincent has been at your side since you were children. He helped you consolidate power after your father died. He's proven himself valuable, loyal, essential. You wouldn't have believed he was capable of this level of betrayal without overwhelming evidence. And you think you know me well enough to make that call? It wasn't a question. After what? 6 months of business negotiations and a fake engagement? You think you understand how I operate? I think I understand that love makes people blind. Alessandra's gaze flicked to Serena, then back to Damien. And whatever you want to call what you feel for your wife, love, possession, obligation, it's a vulnerability that Vincent exploited. He knew that losing her would destabilize you. He counted on it, and he almost succeeded. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Serena watched Damien's expression shift, saw him processing the implications, running through scenarios in that calculating mind of his. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, emotionless. Show me what you have. All of it. Every piece of evidence, every lead, every suspicion. He pulled out his phone, sending off rapid-fire texts. Marco's bringing up the files I had him pull overnight. We're going to compare notes, build a timeline, and figure out exactly how deep this conspiracy goes. Smart. Alessandra moved toward the dining room table, already pulling up files on her phone. I'll send you everything now. But Damien, you need to understand something. This isn't just about Vincent anymore. If I found irregularities, other people might have too. We need to know who else is compromised, who's been working with him, who's going to make a move when this all comes to light. I know. He didn't look at her, his fingers still flying across his phone screen. Which is why we're going to handle this quietly. No big moves, no dramatic confrontations. We gather evidence, identify all the players, and then we cut off the head and the body at the same time. Serena listened to them planning, strategizing, treating Vincent's betrayal like a business problem to be solved, and felt something cold settle in her chest. This was the world she'd tried to escape, the world of calculated violence and strategic eliminations, where human lives were chess pieces and loyalty was just another commodity to be bought and sold. What about me? She interrupted their tactical discussion, drawing both sets of eyes. What's my role in this grand strategy? Damien crossed to her in 3 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with unexpected gentleness. You stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle Vincent. No. She pulled away from him, backing up until there was space between them. I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not sitting in this gilded cage while you two play spy games with my life. If we're doing this, I want to be part of it. Absolutely not. His voice was flat, final. You're pregnant. You're a target. Vincent will move heaven and earth to eliminate you once he knows you're alive. I won't put you in that position. I'm already in that position. The frustration that had been building since Alessandra walked in finally boiled over. Vincent knows I'm alive, Damien. Or he will. The second you start asking questions about my death, you can't investigate the bomb, the evidence, the setup without tipping him off that someone told you the truth. And when that happens, he's going to know it was me. She's right. Alessandra's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Vincent's not stupid. The moment Damien starts pulling at threads, he'll realize Serena must have survived, which means we have a very narrow window to act before this turns into an all-out war. Then we act fast. Damien's expression was grim, determined. Marco's already pulling security footage from the warehouse fire, financial records from the shell companies Vincent's been using, communication logs from the week before Serena disappeared. By tonight, we'll have enough to brief the council. The council won't move that quickly. Alessandra shook her head. They'll want time to review, to deliberate, to make sure they're not being manipulated into eliminating a valuable asset based on emotional accusations from a grieving husband. I'm not grieving anymore. Damien's voice was cold, hard. My wife is alive. My son is on the way. And the man who tried to take them from me is going to pay for every second of suffering he caused. Before either woman could respond, Marco burst through the elevator doors, his arms full of file boxes and his expression tight with urgency. "Boss, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Damien was already moving toward him, his entire body shifting into combat readiness. Vincent's not at any of his usual locations. I've had eyes on his apartment, his office, his mistress's place in River North. He hasn't been seen since last night. Marco set the boxes down hard enough to rattle the contents. "It's like he vanished." Ice flooded Serena's veins. He knows. Somehow he already knows. How? Damien wheeled on her, his expression fierce. "Nobody outside this room knows you're alive. I was careful. The men I called in are loyal. There's no way—" "The diner." Alessandra said it quietly, but with absolute certainty. "Someone at the diner last night recognized you, called it in to someone in Vincent's network. Or he has eyes on Damien's movements, saw him leave with a pregnant woman and put the pieces together." Jesus Christ. Damien ran both hands through his hair, his composure cracking. "If he knows, if he's already moving, then we're out of time." "Not necessarily." Marco pulled out a tablet, pulling up what looked like surveillance footage. "I had someone monitoring the traffic cameras near Vincent's last known location. He left his apartment at 6 this morning with 3 vehicles and a full security detail. Military-grade preparation like he's expecting a war." "Where was he headed?" Damien leaned over the tablet, his eyes scanning the grainy footage. "Northwest, toward the industrial district near the airport." Marco zoomed in on the convoy, enhancing the image. "He's setting up somewhere defensible, somewhere he can make a stand. Or somewhere he can launch an attack from." Serena's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. "He's not running. He's preparing to come after us." The silence that followed was suffocating. Damien and Alessandra exchanged a look that spoke of years of strategic thinking, of understanding the calculus of violence and power. Then Damien pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "Tomas, lock down this building. Full security protocols. Nobody in or out without my personal authorization." He paused, listening. "I don't care if they have credentials. I don't care if they're family. Nobody. Understand?" He hung up and turned to face both women, his expression harder than Serena had ever seen it. "We're going into full defensive mode. Alessandra, call your father. Tell him the alliance is at risk and you need immediate backup. Marco, I want every loyal man we have surrounding this building. If Vincent wants a war, we'll give him one. But it's going to be on our terms." "What about the council?" Alessandra was already dialing, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "If you move against Vincent without their approval, then I'll deal with the consequences." Damien cut her off, his voice absolute. "But I won't let him get anywhere near my wife and son. That's non-negotiable." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Men arrived in waves. Alessandra's security detail from the Giordano family. Marco's hand-picked team of veterans who'd served Damien's father, specialists in close-quarters combat and defensive positioning. They turned the penthouse into a fortress, checking sight lines, establishing kill zones, preparing for an assault that felt increasingly inevitable. Serena watched it all from the bedroom, feeling useless and terrified as her world transformed into a war zone. The baby was active, kicking and rolling like he could sense the tension radiating through her body. She pressed her hand to her belly and tried to remember how to breathe. "You should eat something." She turned to find Alessandra standing in the doorway, her designer suit traded for tactical pants and a fitted black shirt that somehow still managed to look elegant. There was a gun holstered at her hip, worn with the ease of long familiarity. "I'm not hungry." Serena turned back to the window, watching the streets below for any sign of approaching danger. "I'm terrified. There's a difference." "Fair enough." Alessandra moved into the room, her footsteps silent despite the combat boots. "For what it's worth, Damien's good at this. Defensive strategy, protecting what's his. If anyone can keep you safe through what's coming, it's him." "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" Serena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because it sounds an awful lot like you're confirming that Vincent is definitely coming to kill me." "He is." Alessandra said it without sugarcoating, without false comfort. "But the question is whether he's stupid enough to try a direct assault, or whether he'll wait and strike when you're vulnerable. My money's on waiting." "Why?" "Because Vincent's smart. Ambitious, ruthless, but smart." Alessandra leaned against the wall, her posture relaxed despite the gun at her hip. A direct attack on Damien's secured location with his wife inside. That's a declaration of war that even the council can't ignore. It forces their hand, makes them choose sides publicly. Vincent won't want that unless he's absolutely certain he can win. So what will he do instead? Play the long game. Alessandra's smile was cold, calculating. He'll publicly deny any involvement in your death, claim he's shocked and delighted you survived, express confusion about any accusations. He'll force Damien to prove the conspiracy, to present evidence to the council, to go through proper channels, and while that's happening, he'll be working behind the scenes to eliminate loose ends and consolidate support. Serena processed this, her mind working through the implications. He'll come after the people who can testify against him, anyone who helped him, who knows the truth. Exactly. Alessandra pushed off from the wall, moving to stand beside Serena at the window. Which is why Damien's already moving to secure potential witnesses. Marco's bringing in the warehouse workers who might have seen something. The financial analyst who processed Vincent's shell company transactions. Anyone who could corroborate your story. And if Vincent gets to them first, then we lose our case, and it becomes your word against his. Alessandra's reflection in the window was grave, honest, which is why the next 48 hours are critical. We need to move fast, lock down testimony, present an ironclad case before Vincent can eliminate the evidence. You keep saying we. Serena turned to look at her directly. Why are you helping us? You could walk away right now, tell your family the alliance is compromised and cut your losses. Why stay? Alessandra was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Because I'm tired of men like Vincent thinking they can manipulate the system, hurt innocent people, and face no consequences as long as they're clever enough. She met Serena's gaze steadily. You didn't deserve what he did to you, and whether you believe it or not, I don't like the idea of pregnant women being blown up because some ambitious psychopath wants more power. That's surprisingly human of you. Don't get used to it. But there was a hint of warmth in Alessandra's smile, a crack in the Ice Queen facade. I'm still engaged to your husband, still planning to marry him if this all goes sideways. Don't mistake tactical alliance for friendship. Noted. Serena couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips despite everything. For what it's worth, if Damien does end up marrying you, at least I know you're smart enough to keep him alive. That's the idea. Alessandra's phone buzzed, and her expression shifted back to all business. My father's team is in position. They're sweeping the perimeter now, checking for any signs of surveillance or planted devices. How long before Vincent makes his move? Could be hours, could be days. Alessandra headed for the door, then paused. But my instinct says soon. He knows we're mobilizing. He knows every minute that passes is another minute for us to build our case. If he's going to strike, it'll be before we can present to the council. She left before Serena could respond, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Serena turned back to the window, watching the city glitter in the afternoon sun, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. She was still standing there when Damien found her an hour later, his expression tight with stress and exhaustion. He didn't say anything, just crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, his face buried in her hair. I'm sorry. His voice was muffled, rough. For all of this. For not protecting you before. For bringing you back into this nightmare. You didn't bring me back. Serena wrapped her arms around him as much as her pregnant belly would allow. Vincent did. This was always going to happen one way or another. Not if I'd been smarter. Not if I'd seen what he was planning. His arms tightened fractionally, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. I should have known. He's been at my side for years. I should have seen the signs. You trusted him. She pulled back enough to look up at his face. That's not a weakness, Damien. That's what family is supposed to be. You're not the villain here. No, but I'm the fool who let the villain get close enough to hurt you. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. That ends now. Whatever happens with Vincent, whatever it costs, I won't let him hurt you again. What if the cost is your organization, your position, everything you've built? Serena forced herself to ask the question that had been haunting her. Are you really willing to risk it all? Yes. He said it without hesitation, without doubt. You and our son are the only things that matter. Everything else is just empire, and empires can be rebuilt. Before she could respond, Marco's voice crackled through the intercom system Damien had installed. Boss, you need to see this, now! Damien's entire body tensed. He released Serena and moved to the living room where Marco had set up a command center of laptops and monitors. Serena followed, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to prepare herself for whatever new disaster was unfolding. Marco pointed to one of the screens, which showed security footage from what looked like a warehouse loading dock. One of Vincent's guys just showed up at our West Side storage facility, tried to access the secure files, got turned away by our people on duty. Did he say what he wanted? Damien leaned closer to the screen, his expression dark. Said he was there on Vincent's orders to retrieve some old inventory records. Marco pulled up another window, this one showing financial transactions. But according to this, those records include documentation of the shell companies we've been tracking. If Vincent gets his hands on them, we lose half our evidence. He's cleaning house. Alessandra appeared beside them, her tactical assessment sharp and immediate. Taking out anything that could be used against him. How many locations could he hit? 4 storage facilities, 6 safe houses, at least a dozen potential witness locations. Marco's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a map studded with red markers. We can't cover all of them with the people we have. Then we prioritize. Damien's voice was cold, controlled. The storage facilities first. Move everything that could be evidence to this location. I want it locked down, cataloged, ready to present. That'll take hours. Marco was already making calls, his voice sharp with urgency. And it exposes our people to potential ambush. Vincent could be counting on that, using the evidence grab as bait to draw out our forces. He probably is. Damien pulled out his own phone, his jaw set. But we don't have a choice. Without that evidence, it's Serena's word against Vincent's, and the council won't move on just testimony. Serena listened to them debate tactics and risk assessment, feeling the weight of all this violence and strategy crushing down on her chest. This was her fault. Her survival had triggered this chain of events, forced Damien into a corner where every choice carried deadly consequences. Stop, her voice cut through their planning, drawing all eyes. Just stop for a second and think. Vincent's not stupid. He knows you're not going to let him waltz into your storage facilities and destroy evidence. This is a distraction. From what? Damien turned to face her fully, his expression intense. From me. Serena wrapped her arms around her belly, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. He wants you to deploy your forces across the city, spread thin trying to protect evidence and witnesses. And while you're doing that, he'll come here with everything he has and finish what he started 8 months ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Alessandra swore quietly in Italian, her expression shifting from tactical assessment to grudging respect. She's right. It's what I would do. Create chaos, force the enemy to divide their strength, then strike at the exposed heart. How soon? Damien's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded extreme violence. Tonight. Alessandra was already moving, pulling up building schematics on one of the laptops. Maybe sooner. He knows you're mobilizing, knows every hour that passes is another hour for reinforcements to arrive. If he's going to make a move, it has to be before you're fully entrenched. Then we need to be ready. Damien turned to Marco, his orders coming fast and precise. Pull everyone back. Forget the storage facilities. Forget the witnesses. Everyone here, defending this position. I want overlapping fields of fire, multiple fallback positions, and someone monitoring every approach to this building. What about the evidence? Marco asked. If we abandon those sites, we have Serena. Damien's hand found hers, his grip solid and reassuring. She's the evidence. She's the witness. Everything else is just supporting documentation. As long as she survives, we can rebuild the case. As long as she survives. The words echoed in Serena's mind as the penthouse transformed into a war zone around her. Men took up positions at windows and doorways. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Alessandra coordinated with her father's forces, her voice sharp and commanding as she directed teams into defensive formations. And through it all, Serena stood in the center of the chaos, one hand on her belly where their son kicked and rolled, blissfully unaware that his life hung in the balance. She thought about the woman she'd been 8 months ago, the pampered Mafia wife who'd never fired a gun, who'd thought love and loyalty were enough to keep her safe. That woman was dead, buried in a warehouse fire along with all her naive illusions about how the world worked. The woman standing here now was harder, sharper, forged in 8 months of survival and fear. She looked at Damien coordinating defensive positions and made a decision. Teach me to shoot. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tactical chatter like a blade. Damien's head snapped up, his expression shocked. What? Teach me to shoot. She said it louder this time, with absolute certainty. If Vincent's coming, if this is going to turn into a firefight, I need to be able to defend myself, defend our son. Absolutely not. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, his expression fierce. You're 7.5 months pregnant. You're not going anywhere near a gun. Then what am I supposed to do if they get past you? She met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down. Hide in the bedroom and hope for the best? Wait for Vincent to find me and finish what he started? That won't happen. You can't promise that. Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. You're good, Damien. You're smart and ruthless, and you have an army at your back. But Vincent has an army too. And if they breach this penthouse, if they get past your defenses, I need to be able to protect our child. She watched the war play out across his face, the instinct to protect her battling against the cold tactical reality that she was right. Finally, he turned to Alessandra, his expression grim. Show her the basics. Nothing fancy, just enough to point and pull the trigger if it comes to that. Alessandra's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she nodded and gestured for Serena to follow her to the study. The room had been cleared of furniture, transformed into a makeshift armory. Alessandra pulled a compact pistol from the selection, checking the chamber before handing it to Serena. This is a Glock 19, 9mm, point and shoot, minimal recoil, hard to screw up. She demonstrated the proper grip, her movements practiced and efficient. You're not going to become an expert in the next few hours, but I can teach you enough to give you a fighting chance. For the next 45 minutes, Alessandra drilled her on the basics. Grip, stance, sight picture, trigger control. Serena's hand shook the first few times she aimed at the target Alessandra had set up, but gradually she felt her body adapting to the weight, the mechanics, the cold reality of holding a weapon designed to end lives. You're not bad. Alessandra's voice held a note of surprise. Natural hand-eye coordination. Steady hands once you get over the initial fear. I'm terrified. Serena lowered the gun, her arms aching. But I'm more terrified of dying without fighting back. Good. Alessandra took the pistol, showed her how to chamber around, and flipped the safety. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it freeze you when it matters. They were heading back to the living room when the lights went out. Every light in the penthouse, every monitor, every electronic device went dark in the same instant. Emergency backup lighting kicked in after 3 seconds, bathing everything in eerie red, but the damage was done. Vincent had cut the power. The attack was beginning. The emergency lighting painted everything in shades of crimson and shadow, transforming the elegant penthouse into something out of a nightmare. Serena's breath came in short gasps as Alessandra grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the center of the living room where Damien was already barking orders into a radio. All teams, report status. Now! Static crackled through the speakers. Then Marco's voice cut through, tight with tension. Ground floor secure. They cut power to the whole building, not just this unit. Backup generators kicked in for emergency systems only. Roof access? Damien moved to the windows, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the glass. Clear so far. But boss, if they took out the main power grid, they're not playing around. This is a full assault. As if to punctuate Marco's words, the first explosion rocked the building. Not close, maybe 10 floors down, but powerful enough to shake the walls and send a framed photograph crashing to the floor. Serena stumbled, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as the baby kicked in protest at the sudden movement. Stairwell breach on 28. A different voice crackled through the radio, young and scared. They're coming up fast. Heavy weapons. We can't hold... The transmission cut off in a burst of gunfire that made Serena's blood run cold. She'd heard guns before, had been around Damien's world long enough to recognize the sound of violence. But this was different. This was war. Fall back to 35. Damien's voice was ice cold, controlled. Establish a choke point. Make them pay for every floor. Damien, Alessandra's tone carried a warning as she pointed toward the windows. We have movement on the building across the street. Looks like a sniper team setting up. He was already moving, grabbing Serena and pulling her away from the exposed glass. Get her to the panic room. Now. No. Serena dug in her heels, fighting against his grip. I'm not hiding while you're out here. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. He turned her to face him, his hands gripping her shoulders hard enough to bruise. That room is reinforced steel, bulletproof. The only truly safe place in this penthouse. You're going in there and you're staying until this is over. And what if it's never over? Her voice cracked, fear and fury mixing into something desperate. What if they get past you? What if Vincent wins and I'm just locked in a box waiting to die? Then you survive. His hands moved to frame her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. You survive, and you raise our son, and you tell him his father died keeping him safe. But that's not going to happen, because I'm not dying today. And neither are you. Another explosion, closer this time. The windows rattled in their frames. Somewhere below, men were shouting, the sounds of combat growing louder with each passing second. The panic room is through the master bedroom. Alessandra was already moving, her gun drawn and ready. Biometric lock, separate ventilation system, satellite phone for emergency contact. You'll be safe there. Serena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could fight, could help, could do something other than hide like a helpless victim. But the baby chose that moment to kick hard against her ribs, a reminder of what she was really fighting for. Not her own survival, not even her relationship with Damien, but the tiny life that depended on her making smart choices instead of brave ones. Okay. The word felt like surrender, but she forced it out anyway. Okay, I'll go. Relief flashed across Damien's face, quickly masked by tactical focus. He kissed her hard and fast, his lips tasting of violence and desperation. I love you. Remember that, no matter what happens next. Don't! She grabbed his shirt, refusing to let go. Don't say it like goodbye. Promise me you're coming back. I promise. But his eyes told a different story, one written in the cold calculus of odds and firepower. Go, now! Alessandra pulled her away, dragging her toward the bedroom as the sound of gunfire grew closer. They made it 3 steps before the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and titanium. Serena screamed, throwing her arms up to protect her face as something heavy hit the floor with a metallic thunk. Grenade! Marco's voice was barely audible over the sudden chaos. Time slowed to a crawl. Serena watched Damien dive for the device, watched him grab it and hurl it back through the broken window with movements born of muscle memory and years of survival. The explosion lit up the night sky, a bloom of fire and destruction that made her ears ring and her vision blur. But there was no time to process what had almost happened. Men in tactical gear were already rappelling down from the roof, crashing through the remaining windows in a coordinated breach that spoke of military training and serious funding. Vincent hadn't just brought soldiers, he'd brought an army. Move! Alessandra shoved Serena toward the bedroom, laying down covering fire that dropped one of the attackers mid-descent. The man's body swung grotesquely from his rope, painting the white walls with arterial spray. They made it to the bedroom. Alessandra slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, then ran for the walk-in closet that hid the panic room entrance. Serena stumbled after her, her pregnant body awkward and slow, every step an agony of fear and adrenaline. The closet was chaos, designer clothes torn from hangers, shoeboxes scattered, evidence of the rushed transformation from luxury to fortress. Alessandra shoved aside a rack of coats, revealing a steel panel with a biometric scanner. Hand. She grabbed Serena's wrist, pressing her palm to the reader. Nothing happened. What? Serena pressed harder, panic rising in her throat. Why isn't it working? Damien must have reset the access protocols. Alessandra swore viciously, pulling out her phone and typing rapidly. He probably restricted it to his biometrics only after you arrived. Security measure to keep you safe from exactly this kind of situation. So we're locked out. Serena's laugh was edged with hysteria. The panic room I'm supposed to hide in won't let me in. Behind them, something heavy slammed into the bedroom door. Once. Twice. The wood splintered on the third impact, and Serena knew they had seconds at most before Vincent's men broke through. Plan B! Alessandra pulled a second gun from her ankle holster, pressing it into Serena's shaking hands. Remember what I taught you. Point, breathe, squeeze. Don't pull the trigger, squeeze it. I can't. Serena stared at the weapon, at the cold metal that represented the final line between her and death. I've never killed anyone. You will today. Alessandra's voice was hard, certain. Because if you don't, your son dies. Do you understand? They won't take prisoners. They won't show mercy. It's kill or be killed, and you need to choose which one you're going to be. The door exploded inward. Two men in black tactical gear came through fast and low, their weapons sweeping the room with professional efficiency. Alessandra took the first one down with 2 shots to center mass, but the second got off a burst that caught her high in the shoulder and spun her around. Serena watched her fall, watched the gun skitter across the floor, watched the second attacker swing his weapon toward where she stood frozen, her hand on her belly, her mind screaming at her to move, to run, to do something. The attacker's finger tightened on the trigger, and Serena raised her own gun and fired. The recoil surprised her, jerking her arms up and making her stumble backward. She didn't know if she'd hit anything until the man staggered, red blooming across his tactical vest. Not a kill shot. The armor had caught most of it, but enough to make him hesitate, to give her 3 precious seconds. She fired again, and again, and again, pulling the trigger until the gun clicked empty and the man was down, blood pooling beneath him on the expensive carpet. Good! Alessandra's voice was strained with pain as she pushed herself upright, her left arm hanging useless. Now reload. There's a spare magazine in your jacket pocket. Serena's hand shook so badly she almost dropped the gun, but muscle memory from Alessandra's training kicked in. Eject the spent magazine. Slam in the fresh one. Chamber around. Safety off. The mechanical sequence gave her something to focus on besides the growing pool of blood and the man's glassy eyes staring at nothing. Can you move? She helped Alessandra to her feet, taking most of her weight. We need to get back to Damien. No chance. Alessandra gestured toward the bedroom door where more footsteps were thundering closer. They'll have the hallway locked down. We stay here, we fight from a defensive position, we wait for... The explosion that rocked the building this time was massive, apocalyptic. Serena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, felt gravity shift sideways as something fundamental in the building's structure gave way. She grabbed for the door frame, her pregnant belly throwing off her balance, and then Alessandra was pulling her down as the ceiling started to rain plaster and debris. They huddled in the closet as the world tried to shake itself apart. Serena pressed her hands over her ears, squeezed her eyes shut, and prayed to anything that would listen that Damien was alive, that their son would survive, that this nightmare would end. The shaking stopped. The building settled with a groan of stressed metal and concrete. In the sudden silence, Serena could hear alarms wailing, water rushing from broken pipes, and the crackle of fire somewhere close. Damien. His name came out as barely a whisper. She pushed herself upright, ignoring Alessandra's weak protest, and stumbled toward the bedroom door. Damien! Serena, wait! But she was already through the door, stepping over bodies and debris, her gun held in a white-knuckled grip as she moved through the destruction that had been a luxury penthouse minutes ago. The living room was devastated, windows blown out completely, furniture overturned and burning, bullet holes stitching patterns across the walls like violent constellations. And in the center of it all, Damien stood over Vincent's body. Serena's breath caught in her throat. Vincent was on his knees, blood streaming from a wound in his side, his expensive suit torn and filthy. Damien had a gun pressed to the back of his cousin's head, his expression colder than Serena had ever seen it. Damien. She moved closer, glass crunching under her shoes. Don't. Not like this. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence. His entire focus was on the man who'd tried to destroy their lives. Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in your skull right now. Because the council will never accept it. Vincent's voice was strained but defiant. Kill me without their approval, and you're no better than a common murderer. They'll strip you of everything. Your position, your territory, your legitimacy. Is that what you want? What I want is for you to pay for what you did to my wife. Damien's finger tightened on the trigger. For the 8 months she spent running. for the fear you put in her eyes, for trying to kill my son before he was even born. So kill me. Vincent spat blood onto the expensive carpet. Prove to everyone that you're ruled by emotion instead of logic. Show them that love makes you weak. That's what I was counting on all along. The admission hung in the air like poison. Serena watched understanding dawn on Damien's face, watched him realize that even in defeat, Vincent was still trying to manipulate him, to force him into a choice that would destroy everything he'd built. You want me to kill you. Damien's voice was soft, dangerous. Because dead, you become a martyr, a victim of a man who couldn't control his emotions. The council would have to investigate, to question my judgment, to wonder if I'm stable enough to lead. Finally figuring it out. Vincent managed a bloody smile. Took you long enough. Kill me, and you lose. Let me live, and I'll spend every day working to destroy you. Either way, I win. No. Serena's voice cut through the standoff, clear and certain. You lose because you're wrong about one thing. She moved to stand beside Damien, her gun still in her hand, her belly carrying the proof of everything Vincent had tried to take from them. Love doesn't make him weak, it makes him stronger, smart enough to know that killing you in anger would be exactly what you want, strategic enough to use you alive as evidence of your own betrayal, and ruthless enough to let you face the council knowing they'll hand down a sentence worse than any quick death Damien could give you. Vincent's smile faltered. For the first time since Serena had entered the room, she saw real fear flicker across his face. The council is already on their way. Marco appeared from the stairwell, his radio crackling with voices. Alessandra's father called them the minute the attack started. They're going to want answers and witnesses. Then let's give them both. Damien finally looked at Serena, and in his eyes she saw exhaustion, relief, and love so profound it made her chest ache. Get him up. Secure him. I want him alive for what comes next. Marco moved to comply, hauling Vincent to his feet with efficiency born of long practice. Other men appeared from the shadows, Damien's forces, battered but alive, moving with the grim purpose of soldiers who'd survived combat. Mrs. Moretti, Tomas materialized at her elbow, his expression concerned. You're bleeding. We need to get you medical attention. Serena looked down and realized he was right. Her arms were covered in cuts from the shattered glass, blood seeping through her clothes in a dozen places. But it was the sudden cramping pain low in her belly that made her gasp and double over. Damien. His name came out strangled, terrified. Something's wrong. The baby... He was at her side in an instant, catching her as her legs gave out. Get Dr. Castellano up here, now, and clear a path to the elevator. The elevator's not working, boss. Structural damage from the explosion. Marco's voice was tight with urgency. We'll have to take the stairs. Then we take the stairs. Damien scooped her up like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Serena, look at me. Stay with me. Everything's going to be okay. But the pain was building, wave after wave of cramping that felt like her body was trying to tear itself apart. Serena pressed her face against Damien's shoulder and tried to remember how to breathe as he carried her through the devastated penthouse, down smoke-filled stairwells, past bodies and debris and the wreckage of Vincent's failed coup. By the time they reached the ground floor, the pain had become a constant, crushing pressure. Dr. Castellano met them in the lobby, her medical bag already open, her expression shifting from professional concern to alarm as she assessed Serena's condition. How far along is she? The doctor's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, examining wounds. 32 weeks, Damien's voice was rough with fear. The baby's not due for another 2 months. The baby doesn't care about due dates. Dr. Castellano pulled out her stethoscope, pressing it to Serena's belly. She's in labor. We need to get her to a hospital, now. No hospital. Serena forced the words out through gritted teeth. Vincent's people could be anywhere. Staff, security, other patients. It's not safe. She's right. Damien looked at Dr. Castellano with desperate intensity. Can you do it here? Deliver the baby? Here? The doctor looked around the destroyed lobby at the smoke and debris and armed men. This is insane. She needs a proper facility, surgical equipment in case of complications. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last, and Serena's scream echoed through the lobby. When it finally receded, she grabbed Dr. Castellano's hand with enough force to make the older woman wince. "I'm not going to a hospital. If you can't deliver my baby here, then I'll do it myself." Dr. Castellano and Damien exchanged a long look, some silent communication passing between them. Then the doctor nodded grimly. "Fine, but we're going to need supplies, a clean room, boiled water, sterilized instruments, blood for transfusion in case she hemorrhages. Whatever you need, you'll have." Damien was already issuing orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Clear the penthouse across the hall. Get it set up as a makeshift delivery room, and someone find me every medical supply in this building." The next hours blurred together in a haze of pain and fear. Serena barely registered being carried back up the stairs, barely noticed the frantic activity as Damien's men transformed a stranger's apartment into something approximating a delivery room. All she could focus on was the relentless pressure, the overwhelming need to push, her body taking over with primal urgency. "It's too soon." She gasped between contractions, tears streaming down her face. "He's too small. He won't survive." "He's a fighter." Damien was beside her, his hand gripping hers hard enough to hurt, his face pale but determined. "Just like his mother. He'll survive because he's ours, and we don't give up." Dr. Castellano positioned herself at the foot of the makeshift bed, her expression grave but focused. "The baby's in distress. Heart rate's dropping. We need to get him out fast." "How fast?" Damien's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Now would be good." The doctor looked up, meeting Serena's eyes. "On the next contraction, I need you to push. Everything you have. Understand?" Serena nodded, terror and determination warring in her chest. When the next wave hit, she bore down with every ounce of strength she had left, screaming through the pain, feeling something fundamental shift inside her. "Good. Again. He's crowning." She pushed again and again, lost in a world of pain and effort where nothing existed except the desperate need to bring her son into the world alive. Distantly, she heard Dr. Castellano calling instructions, heard Damien's voice rough with encouragement, heard the organized chaos of people moving around her. And then, cutting through everything else, she heard a sound that made her heart stop. A baby's cry. Thin, reedy, furious at being forced into the cold world 2 months too early, but alive. Undeniably, miraculously alive. "It's a boy." Dr. Castellano's voice was thick with emotion as she placed the tiny, bloody infant on Serena's chest. "Premature, underweight, but breathing on his own. You did it." Serena looked down at her son, at the impossibly small person who'd survived explosions and gunfire and a labor that should have killed them both, and felt something crack open in her chest. He was so tiny, his skin almost translucent, his eyes screwed shut against the harsh emergency lighting. But his little fists were clenched, his chest rising and falling with determined breaths. "Hi, baby." Her voice broke on the words. "I'm your mom. You're safe now. You're finally safe." "He's perfect." Damien's hand was shaking as he touched their son's downy head, his expression transformed by wonder and relief. "Absolutely perfect." "Doctor." Castellano was already moving again, working efficiently to cut the cord, to clean the baby, to check him over with the limited equipment available. "He needs a neonatal ICU. Premature infants this early need specialized care." "Then we'll get him there." Damien stood, his voice shifting back into command mode. "Marco, I want the best children's hospital in the city, locked down. Full security detail. Nobody in or out without my personal authorization." "Already on it, boss." Marco appeared in the doorway, his phone pressed to his ear. "Northwestern's prepping a secure wing as we speak." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made everyone tense. Weapons appeared in hands with practiced speed, but it was Alessandra who stepped through the door, her arm in an improvised sling, her face pale with blood loss but her eyes sharp. "The council's in the lobby." Her voice was strained but controlled. "They want to speak with you. Now. Tell them to wait." Damien didn't take his eyes off Serena and their son. "I'm not leaving my family." "They won't wait." Alessandra moved closer, her expression grave. "Vincent's claiming you staged this whole thing. that Serena faked her death to create justification for a power grab, that the baby isn't even yours. He's spinning this as a conspiracy against him, and some of the council members are listening. Let them listen. Serena's voice was exhausted but fierce as she cradled their tiny son against her chest. We have the evidence, the forged documents, the text message where he confessed, my testimony about the bomb. They can listen to whatever lies Vincent wants to tell, but the truth is right here in this room. She's right. Damien's expression hardened into something that reminded Serena why men feared him. Tell the council I'll be down in 5 minutes, and they can see for themselves what Vincent's conspiracy looks like. A woman who just gave birth in a war zone because my cousin tried to murder her twice. Alessandra nodded and withdrew. Dr. Castellano finished her examination of the baby, wrapping him in clean blankets before placing him back in Serena's arms. He needs to go to the hospital within the hour. The doctor's tone left no room for argument. But he's stable for now, breathing well, good color. He's a fighter, this one. He had no choice. Serena looked down at her son, at the tiny miracle who'd survived what should have killed him. Fighting is in his blood. Damien leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead, and then to the baby's downy head. I have to go deal with the council. Can you go? She managed a tired smile. End this. Make sure Vincent can never hurt us again. We'll be here when you get back. He kissed her again, harder this time, a promise and a vow. Then he was gone, striding out of the room with the absolute certainty of a man who'd already decided how this was going to end. Serena sat alone with her newborn son, listening to the sounds of argument and accusation filtering up from below, and felt something settle in her chest. They'd survived. Against every odd, every attempt to destroy them, they'd survived. The war wasn't over yet. Vincent would fight until his last breath, would spin whatever lies he could to save himself. The council would deliberate and debate and demand proof, but in the end, it wouldn't matter, because Serena was alive, her son was alive, and Damien Moretti would burn the entire city to ash before he let anyone threaten his family again. That truth was written in blood and fire across 42 floors of devastated luxury. And everyone, from the council members in the lobby to Vincent bleeding in his restraints, was about to learn exactly what it meant to underestimate the lengths a man would go to protect the people he loved. The council chamber had been hastily assembled in what was once an elegant conference room in a building 2 blocks from the devastation. 6 men sat around the mahogany table, their faces carved from decades of violence and strategic calculation. These were the patriarchs who'd built Chicago's underworld, who'd survived wars and betrayals, and the constant churn of ambitious men trying to take what they'd built. Damien stood before them with Vincent on his knees beside him, blood still seeping through the makeshift bandage on his cousin's side. Marco and Tomas flanked the door, their weapons visible, their expressions blank. The message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a reckoning. You call an emergency session to accuse a member of this council of treason. Angelo Russo spoke first, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. You better have more than hurt feelings and a convenient resurrection, Moretti. I have evidence. Damien's voice was cold, controlled. He nodded to Marco, who produced a tablet and began pulling up files. Financial records showing Vincent moving money through shell companies to fund a private army. Communication logs proving he was in contact with the Calabrese family during the warehouse raid that killed 3 of my men. Security footage from the night my wife's car exploded showing Vincent entering the parking garage 2 hours before the bomb detonated. The tablet made its way around the table, each patriarch studying the evidence with expressions that gave nothing away. Vincent tried to speak, but Damien's hand on his shoulder squeezed hard enough to make him gasp in pain. I'm not finished. Damien pulled out his phone, queuing up the text message Vincent had sent to Serena 8 months ago. This is a message sent from Vincent's personal phone to my wife's number the night she was supposed to have died. Sorry about the car, cousin. Nothing personal, just business. Say hi to your wife for me. Oh wait, she's dead. My mistake. The silence that followed was absolute. Carlo Giordano, Alessandra's father, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. This could be fabricated, a woman scorned, a husband blinded by love, doctoring evidence to eliminate a rival. Then examine it. Damien set the phone on the table. Run whatever forensic analysis you want. Check the metadata, the tower pings, the timestamp. It's real. Just like the bomb was real. Just like my wife spending 8 months in hiding was real. Just like the assault on my building tonight that killed 6 of my men and put my newborn son in the NICU was real. Newborn son? Russo's eyebrows rose fractionally. Your wife gave birth tonight? 30 minutes ago. 2 months premature because Vincent's assault triggered early labor. Damien's voice was soft, deadly. She delivered in a makeshift operating room while bullets were still flying, while my building was on fire, while the man responsible for all of it was trying to kill us both. This is insane. Vincent finally found his voice, strained but defiant. He's using his wife's survival to paint me as a villain? I had nothing to do with that bomb. I've been loyal to this family, to Damien, for my entire life. And this is how he repays me? With accusations and doctored evidence? Shut up. The command came from Salvatore De Luca, the oldest of the council members. His eyes were on the tablet, studying the financial records with the focus of a man who'd built his empire on understanding money flows. These shell companies. I recognize some of these routing numbers. They've been used before, 3 years ago during the power struggle after Moretti's father died. The implication hung heavy in the air. Vincent had been planning this for years, building his infrastructure, waiting for the right moment to strike. That doesn't prove anything. Vincent's voice was starting to crack, desperation bleeding through. Money gets moved around all the time. It's how we operate. You can't execute a man based on financial speculation. No. Damien pulled out another phone, this one Vincent's, seized when they'd captured him. But we can execute him based on his own words. Marco, play the recording. Marco tapped the screen and Vincent's voice filled the room. A conversation from 2 weeks ago, captured by surveillance equipment that had been running in Damien's office without Vincent's knowledge. The cousin's voice was clear, unmistakable, as he spoke to someone on a burner phone. The Moretti marriage was always going to be the weak point. Serena made him soft, made him think love was more important than power. Getting rid of her was supposed to break him, make him vulnerable enough to push aside. But the bastard's stronger than I thought, so we'll have to accelerate the timeline. The Giordano alliance gives us the opening we need. Once he's married to Alessandra, once the families are merged, we make our move. Take him out, blame it on rival factions, and I step in to maintain stability. The recording continued, Vincent laying out his entire conspiracy in his own words. The plan to eliminate Damien after the wedding, the deals he'd made with rival families to carve up Moretti territory, the men he'd placed in key positions who would support his coup when the time came. By the time it finished, Vincent's face had gone gray. Around the table, the patriarchs sat in grim silence, their verdict already written in their expressions. Anything else you want to say? Russo asked Vincent, his tone almost gentle. Any defense you'd like to offer? Vincent looked around the table, seeing only closed doors and sealed fates. When he spoke, his voice was bitter, resigned. I did what I had to do. Damien was weak. He married for love instead of strategy. He let his emotions compromise his judgment. Someone had to be ready to lead when his weakness destroyed everything our family built. So you tried to murder his pregnant wife. De Luca's voice was flat, final. You orchestrated a bombing, forged evidence to frame her as a traitor, and let your cousin believe she was dead for 8 months. Then, when she survived and exposed your conspiracy, you launched a military assault on a residential building, killing civilians and putting a newborn child at risk. I was protecting the family. Vincent's composure finally shattered completely. Someone had to make the hard choices. Someone had to be willing to do what was necessary. What was necessary? Giordano repeated the words slowly, his gaze cold. Tell me, Vincent, when you planted that bomb under Serena Moretti's car, did you know she was pregnant? The question landed like a bomb of its own. Vincent's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's not... She wasn't showing yet. I couldn't have known, but you suspected. Damien's voice cut through Vincent's stammering like a blade. You'd seen us together, seen the way she was careful with wine at dinners, the way she glowed. You knew or suspected, and you planted the bomb anyway. Tried to kill my wife and my unborn son because they made me weak. The council will now vote. Russo stood, his decision already made. All those in favor of finding Vincent Moretti guilty of treason against this family, attempted murder of a made man's wife, and conspiracy to overthrow legitimate leadership signify by raising your hand. 6 hands rose. Not a single dissenting vote. The verdict was unanimous. Vincent Moretti, you are hereby stripped of all rank, all protection, and all rights within this organization. Russo's words carried the weight of execution. Your assets are forfeit. Your men are released from their oaths to you, and your life is given over to Damian Moretti to dispense justice as he sees fit. Vincent started to speak, to beg, to make promises. But Damian was already hauling him to his feet, dragging him toward the door. The cousin struggled weakly, his wound sapping his strength, but Damian's grip was iron. Wait, Alessandra's voice stopped them at the threshold. She stood in the doorway, her arm still in its sling, her face pale, but her eyes hard. Before you kill him, there's something he needs to see. She pulled out her phone, holding it up so Vincent could see the screen. On it was a photo of Serena in the hospital bed, their tiny son cradled in her arms, both of them alive and whole and utterly beyond Vincent's reach. That's what you failed to destroy. Alessandra's voice was quiet, deadly. A family. A future. Something you'll never understand because you were too busy playing king to realize that real power comes from what you protect, not what you take. Vincent stared at the photo, and something in his expression crumbled. Not remorse. Men like him were incapable of true remorse. But the devastating realization that he'd lost, that all his planning and scheming and violence had accomplished nothing except his own destruction. Take him! Damian shoved Vincent toward Marco and Tomas. You know where? The warehouse was on the far south side, the kind of place where screams went unheard and bodies disappeared without questions. Damian had used it before, when justice needed to be dispensed beyond the eyes of law enforcement and civilian witnesses. It smelled like rust and old blood, like decades of violence soaked into the concrete. They chained Vincent to a support beam, his arms stretched above his head, his feet barely touching the ground. The wound in his side had started bleeding again, painting his shirt a deeper shade of red. But Damian knew from experience that gut wounds took time to kill. Vincent would be conscious for what came next. Any last words? Damian checked his gun, the motion mechanical, routine. He'd done this before, would probably do it again. This was the world he lived in, the price of power and protection. You think you've won? Vincent's laugh was wet, pained. You think killing me ends this, but it doesn't. The family saw you choose love over strategy, saw you risk everything for one woman and a baby. They'll remember that. They'll use it against you. And eventually, someone smarter than me will exploit that weakness and take everything you have. Maybe, Damian raised the gun, aiming at his cousin's head. But they'll have to go through me to get to my family. And I promise you, Vincent, I'm much harder to kill than you were. The shot echoed through the warehouse, final and absolute. Vincent's body jerked once, then went still, blood and brain matter painting the concrete wall behind him in abstract patterns that would haunt this space long after his corpse was disposed of. Damian lowered the gun and stood for a long moment, staring at what remained of the cousin who'd once been his most trusted advisor. He felt nothing, no satisfaction, no grief, no sense of justice served, just the cold certainty that this had been necessary, that some betrayals could only be answered with blood. It's done. Marco appeared at his elbow, already pulling out his phone to arrange cleanup. What do you want us to do with the body? Lake Michigan. Damian's voice was flat, empty. Weight it down deep. I don't want any part of him washing ashore. And the men who were loyal to him? Give them a choice. Swear new oaths of loyalty to me, or leave Chicago with whatever they can carry. No middle ground, no second chances. Damian turned away from Vincent's corpse, already moving toward the door. I want them decided by morning. The drive back to the hospital took 20 minutes through empty pre-dawn streets. The city was just starting to wake up, early commuters and delivery trucks beginning their routines, completely unaware that a war had been fought and won while they slept. Damian watched the familiar streets slide past and felt the weight of the last 12 hours settle into his bones. The hospital's secure wing was on lockdown when he arrived, Giordano family guards working alongside his own men to create an impenetrable perimeter. They snapped to attention as he passed, recognition and respect in their eyes. Word had already spread about the council's verdict, about Vincent's execution. By noon, every family in the city would know that Damien Moretti had eliminated a traitor and emerged stronger than ever. But none of that mattered as much as the sight that greeted him when he pushed open the door to Serena's room. She was asleep, her face peaceful despite the exhaustion written in every line of her body. The monitors beside her bed beeped steadily, tracking vital signs that had finally stabilized. And in the clear plastic bassinet beside her, their son slept wrapped in blankets, his tiny chest rising and falling with determined breaths. Damien moved quietly, not wanting to wake either of them. He sank into the chair beside Serena's bed and let himself finally feel the full weight of what they'd survived. His hands were still shaking, reaction from the adrenaline, from the violence, from the impossible miracle of his family being alive. "Is it done?" Serena's voice was barely above a whisper, thick with sleep. He looked up to find her eyes open, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "It's done. Vincent's dead. His conspiracy's dismantled. The council ruled in our favor." "Good." She reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. "I'm sorry you had to do it. I know he was family. He stopped being family the moment he tried to kill you." Damien brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "How are you feeling?" "Like I gave birth in a war zone." Her smile was tired but genuine. "The doctors say I'll make a full recovery. No permanent damage. Just need rest and time to heal." "And him?" Damien's gaze moved to the bassinet, to the impossibly small person who'd survived against all odds. "He's a fighter, breathing on his own, maintaining body temperature, even tried to nurse a little while ago." Pride colored her voice, maternal and fierce. "The doctors are cautiously optimistic. They want to keep him here for a few weeks, make sure his lungs develop properly, but they think he'll be fine." "He will be." Damien stood, moving to the bassinet to stare down at his son. The baby was awake, his dark eyes, so like Damien's own, staring up with that unfocused newborn gaze. "He's a Moretti. We don't give up." "Have you thought about names?" Serena shifted in the bed, trying to get a better view of both of them. "We never got that far in the planning." Damien reached into the bassinet, his large hand dwarfing the baby's entire body as he gently stroked the downy head. "What about Marcus? After my father?" "I like it." Serena's voice was soft, thoughtful. "Marcus Moretti. Strong name for a strong boy." "Marcus Damien Moretti," Damien corrected, feeling something settle in his chest. "So he knows where he comes from, what his family survived to give him a future." The baby chose that moment to let out a tiny yawn, his little fists waving in the air like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. The gesture was so absurdly human, so perfectly normal amid all the violence and chaos, that Damien felt his throat tighten with emotion he didn't know how to name. "I thought I'd lost you both." The admission came out rough, barely controlled. "When the building was under assault, when I heard you screaming in labor, I thought this was how it ended, with me failing to protect the only things that mattered. But you didn't fail." Serena's hand found his, squeezing tight. "We're here, we survived, all three of us, because you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." He turned to look at her, this woman who'd survived bombs and betrayals and childbirth amid gunfire. "You could have stayed hidden, could have raised our son alone and kept yourself safe from all of this. But you came back. You fought. You stood in front of the council 8 months pregnant and demanded justice." "I came back because you're his father." Serena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because our son deserves to know the man who would burn the world to keep him safe. Because, despite everything, the violence, the danger, the impossible choices, I still love you." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration and a promise. Damien leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, breathing in the scent of hospital soap, and underneath it, the familiar warmth that was purely Serena. "I love you too." He said it quietly, a vow meant only for her. "I never stopped, not for a single second of those 8 months. And I swear to you, on everything I am, Vincent was the last person who will ever threaten our family." A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Alessandra stood in the doorway, her arm still in its sling, but her expression lighter than Damien had seen it in months. Sorry to interrupt. She moved into the room with careful steps, her gaze moving from Serena to the baby and back. I wanted to check on you before I left. Left? Serena pushed herself more upright in the bed. Where are you going? Back to my father's house. Alessandra's smile was wry, knowing. Our engagement is officially over as of this morning. The council witnessed it, made it legitimate. You're free to reclaim your position as Damien's wife without any political complications. I'm sorry, Serena said it carefully, watching the other woman's face for signs of hurt or anger. I know this wasn't what you signed up for. Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for. Alessandra moved to the bassinet, looking down at Marcus with an expression that might have been longing. I wanted an alliance with a man strong enough to hold his territory and smart enough to value loyalty. Damien proved he's both. The fact that his loyalty is to you instead of me doesn't change the strategic value of our families working together. So what happens now? Damien asked, his hand still holding Serena's. With the Giordano alliance. Now we formalize it properly. Alessandra turned to face them both, her business face firmly in place, not through marriage, but through mutual interests. The Giordanos help secure your northern territory. You help us with our shipping operations through the port. We share intelligence, coordinate on threats to both families, and build something stronger than what a wedding could have given us. A real partnership, Damien studied her carefully, based on respect instead of obligation. Exactly. Alessandra pulled an envelope from her jacket, setting it on the bedside table. That's the formal proposal. Look it over when you have time. No rush. Your priority right now should be your family. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Serena with an expression that might have been respect. For what it's worth, you were right. Love doesn't make him weak. It makes him terrifying. I've never seen Damien as focused, as ruthless, as absolutely unstoppable as he was tonight. All because you and that baby were in danger. Thank you. Serena's voice was quiet but genuine. For your help, for the evidence you gathered, for standing with us when you didn't have to. Thank each other. Alessandra's smile was sharp, satisfied. I just provided the ammunition. You two won the war. She left without another word, her footsteps fading down the hallway. The next weeks passed in a blur of hospital visits and recovery. Marcus grew stronger each day, gaining weight and lung capacity, proving the doctor's cautious optimism correct. Serena healed, the cuts and bruises fading, her body slowly returning to something approaching normal after the trauma of premature labor. And Damien rebuilt. The penthouse was a total loss, but he secured a new property, a brownstone in a quieter neighborhood with good security and room for a nursery. He restructured his organization, promoting men who'd proven loyal during Vincent's assault, eliminating weak points that the conspiracy had exposed. The council watched it all with approval. Damien's handling of the Vincent situation had proven he could be both strategic and ruthless, that his love for his family enhanced rather than compromised his leadership. The other patriarchs began treating him with new respect, acknowledging him as an equal rather than a young upstart still proving himself. On a cold December morning, 6 weeks after Marcus's birth, Serena stood in the nursery of their new home and watched her son sleep in his crib. He'd grown from the impossibly tiny infant in the NICU to a healthy baby who'd been cleared to come home just yesterday. His dark hair was starting to thicken, his features beginning to show hints of both his parents. Ready for his first real day home? Damien appeared in the doorway, already dressed in one of his perfectly tailored suits, preparing for a meeting with the Giordano family to finalize their new alliance. As ready as I'll ever be. Serena turned to face him, feeling the weight of everything they'd survived settle into something like peace. It's strange. 6 months ago, I was serving coffee in a diner and sleeping with a knife under my pillow. Now I'm here, back in your world, raising our son in a house surrounded by armed guards. Is that what you want? Damien moved into the room, his expression serious. Because if it's not, if you'd rather have something different, we can make that happen. I can step back, hand operational control to Marco, move us somewhere quiet where Marcus can grow up without all of this. Serena studied him, this man who would genuinely walk away from everything he'd built if she asked. The offer was real. She could see it in his eyes, in the set of his shoulders. He would do it, would sacrifice his empire for her comfort. No. She said it firmly, certainly. This is our life, our world. I'm not running from it anymore. I'm not hiding or pretending to be someone I'm not. She moved to stand in front of him, her hands settling on his chest. I'm Serena Moretti, your wife, Marcus's mother, and I'm done being afraid. You're sure? His hands came up to frame her face, searching her expression. Because this world is brutal, dangerous. It'll try to hurt you again. Different enemies, different threats, but always something. I know. She covered his hands with hers, holding his gaze. But I also know that you'll fight for us, that you'll do whatever it takes to keep us safe. And that's enough. That's everything. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, a claiming and a promise wrapped into one gesture. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Marcus let out a small cry from his crib. Not distressed, just announcing his presence. Your son's awake. Serena smiled, moving to pick up the baby. He'll want to eat before you leave. She settled into the rocking chair by the window, Marcus latching on with the determined focus he brought to everything, while Damien stood watch. The morning sunlight painted everything in shades of gold, transforming the armed guards visible through the window into something almost artistic. I talked to the Giordanos yesterday. Damien said it casually, but Serena heard the weight behind the words. They want to establish a foundation, legitimate businesses that help families who've been affected by violence, women's shelters, legal aid, job training programs. That's surprisingly altruistic for a Mafia family. Serena looked up from Marcus, her expression curious. Alessandra's idea, actually. Damien's smile was slight but genuine. She thinks our world needs to evolve, that we can maintain power without leaving quite so much collateral damage. The foundation would be a step in that direction. What do you think? Serena shifted Marcus to her other side, watching Damien's face carefully. I think she might be right. He moved to the window, looking out over the city that had tried so hard to destroy them. We can't change what we are, can't pretend the violence and power plays don't exist, but maybe we can build something good alongside the darkness. Give back to the communities we operate in instead of just taking from them. You want to run it. Serena said it as fact, not question. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the thoughtful expression. The foundation. You want to be part of making it real. With you. He turned to face her fully. I want us to build it together. Show Marcus that power can be used for something other than destruction. That his parents fought and survived so they could create something worth protecting. The image he painted took Serena's breath away. Not a future of hiding and fear, but one of purpose and transformation. Using the empire Damien had built to help people like her, women who'd been caught in the crossfire, families torn apart by violence, children who needed protection from the darkness that men like Vincent represented. Yes. She said it simply, feeling pieces click into place. Let's do it. Let's build something beautiful out of all this ugliness. Marcus finished eating and let out a satisfied burp that made both his parents laugh. Damien took him, cradling the tiny body with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence those same hands had dealt just weeks ago. He walked to the window, holding his son up to see the city spread out below them. This is your legacy. He spoke quietly, his voice meant for Marcus even though the baby was too young to understand. Not the violence, not the empire or the territory or the power plays. This. Your mother's strength, the family we fought to keep intact, the good we're going to build because we survived when we should have died. Serena joined them at the window, her arm wrapping around Damien's waist, the three of them framed in golden light. Below them, the city continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that the family standing in this window had reshaped its underworld, that a woman had survived assassination and childbirth amid gunfire, that a baby born 2 months too early in a war zone had become the catalyst for transformation. 5 years later, Serena stood in the same nursery, now converted to a bedroom for a rambunctious 5-year-old, and watched Marcus play with his toy cars on the floor. He'd grown into a beautiful child, all dark curls and serious eyes, with his father's stubborn determination and his mother's quick mind. Mama, watch. He crashed two cars together with sound effects that would have made a Hollywood Foley artist proud. That's the bad guys, and this one is Papa coming to stop them. Very dramatic. Serena smiled, settling onto the floor beside him. Did you have a good day at school? Uh-huh. We learned about helping people. Miss Sarah said that's what heroes do. They help people who can't help themselves. He looked up at her with those impossibly earnest eyes. Papa's a hero, right? Because he helps people. Serena thought about how to answer that. How to explain to a 5-year-old that his father operated in shades of gray that defied simple hero narratives, that Damien ran an empire built on violence and power, but also funded shelters and legal aid programs, that he'd killed men, but also saved more lives than he'd taken through the foundation they'd built together. Your papa is a complicated man who tries very hard to do the right thing. She settled on that, knowing there would be years of more detailed explanations ahead. He protects our family and helps people who need it. That's what's important. Okay. Marcus accepted this with the easy logic of childhood. Can I have a snack? Ask Rosa. Serena gestured toward the kitchen where their housekeeper was preparing dinner. And wash your hands first. He scrambled up and ran toward the kitchen, leaving Serena alone with her thoughts. The house was quieter now than it had been in those first weeks, the armed guards less visible, the security more subtle. They still lived with protection, always would, but it no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. Footsteps on the stairs announced Damien's arrival. He appeared in the doorway, still wearing his suit from the office, but his tie was loosened and his sleeves rolled up, the signal that his workday was officially over. How was the board meeting? Serena stood, moving into his arms with the ease of long practice. Productive. The foundation's expanding into 3 new cities next quarter. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his hands settling at her waist. We're making a real difference, Tesoro. The shelters housed over 200 women and children last year. The legal aid program won 14 cases against abusive partners. The job training got 63 people into legitimate employment. Numbers don't lie. She smiled against his shoulder, feeling the pride radiating from him. You're changing things, one family at a time. We're changing things, he corrected gently. I'm just the money and the muscle. You're the vision, the heart that makes it work. It was true. Over the last 5 years, Serena had transformed from a survivor into a force in her own right. She ran the foundation's day-to-day operations, interfaced with the families they helped, made the decisions about resource allocation and program expansion. The women who came through their doors saw her not as a Mafia wife, but as someone who understood their fear because she'd lived it. Marcus asked if you were a hero today. She pulled back to look up at him. I didn't know what to tell him. Tell him the truth. Damien's expression was serious, thoughtful. That I'm a man who's done bad things for what I believed were good reasons. That I protect our family with everything I have, and that I'm trying to build something better than what I inherited. That's a complicated answer for a 5-year-old. He's a complicated kid. Damien's smile was soft, paternal. He'll understand eventually, and when he's old enough to really ask questions, we'll give him real answers. No sanitized fairy tales. No pretending we're something we're not. Marcus's voice drifted up from downstairs, already launching into an animated explanation to Rosa about the car crash scene he'd created. Serena listened to her son's joy, so different from the tiny premature infant who'd fought for every breath, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. We did it. She said it quietly, a statement of fact and wonder. We survived. We built this. We're actually happy. We are. Damien's arms tightened around her. And we're going to stay that way. Because I learned something from Vincent's betrayal. What's that? That the people who make you vulnerable also make you strong. He tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes with absolute certainty. You and Marcus are my greatest weakness and my greatest strength. Anyone who wants to hurt me has to go through you first. And after what you survived, after how you fought back, that's a pretty formidable obstacle. Are you saying I'm scary? Serena's laugh was light, teasing. I'm saying you're terrifying. But his expression was full of love and respect. The woman who survived a bomb, hid for 8 months pregnant, gave birth in a war zone, and then built a foundation that's changing lives across 3 states? Yeah, you're absolutely terrifying. They stood there in what used to be a nursery, listening to their son play downstairs, and Serena thought about the journey that had brought them here. The betrayal and violence, the fear and pain, the impossible choices and devastating losses, but also the love that had survived it all, the family they'd fought to protect, the future they were building from the ashes of Vincent's conspiracy. The woman who'd worked in that diner was gone, buried under 8 months of survival and 5 years of transformation. In her place stood someone harder, stronger, forged in fire and blood into something unbreakable. She was Serena Moretti, wife, mother, survivor, and architect of her own destiny. And standing beside Damien in their home, with their son's laughter echoing through the halls and the foundation they'd built changing lives every day, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd never be a victim again. This was her empire too, built not on violence and fear, but on resilience and love and the unshakable determination to protect what mattered most. The city below their windows still held danger, still operated in shades of gray that would never fully lighten. But it also held hope now, in the shelters bearing their name, in the families they'd helped, in the legacy they were creating for Marcus and whatever children might follow. The past was written in blood and fire. But the future? The future was theirs to shape. And Serena Moretti had survived too much, fought too hard, and built something too beautiful to let anyone take it away. As Damien kissed her forehead and Marcus called for them to come play, Serena smiled and felt the last ghost of fear release its hold. They'd won. Not just against Vincent, but against the darkness that had tried to consume them. They'd taken their broken pieces and forged them into something stronger than what they'd started with. And that, she thought, as she descended the stairs hand in hand with her husband, was the only victory that truly mattered. Not power or territory or revenge, but the simple, profound triumph of building a life worth protecting, of turning survival into something that looked remarkably like happiness. The story that had started in blood and betrayal ended here, in a home filled with love, in a foundation built on second chances, in a family that had survived everything the world threw at them and emerged not just intact, but transformed. Some stories end with vengeance, others with tragedy, but theirs ended with something far more powerful, with the promise that tomorrow would be better than yesterday, that their son would inherit not just an empire, but a legacy of resilience and purpose. And as the Chicago sunset painted their windows gold and Marcus's laughter filled the house, Serena knew that this was what she'd been fighting for all along. Not just survival, but a future worth surviving for. They'd made it, against every odd, every enemy, every impossible obstacle. They'd made it home,